Chapter 743. The finger, like a pillar with a diameter of 100 feet, rushed directly out of the ground and avoided the human-faced Yu-Isin and Taoist in a very clever way. Then it turned around and came back to crush the two of them. Crushed by the finger, Exian and the human-faced fish only felt that the void around them was frozen by an indescribably powerful force in an instant. Even breathing felt extremely difficult. Almost without any ability to resist, they were directly crushed into powder by the huge finger. Fortunately, both the Exian and Taoist, who cultivated the cultivation method passed down from immortal Luo Gua of Shanqing Lingua. Their cultivation realm had reached a mysterious realm that was only one realm away from the individual immortal realm. Therefore, although they felt that the power of the finger was shocking and even had the power to freeze space, they still barely managed to react. They gathered their power and barely managed to escape from the range of the finger before it could crush them. With a loud rumble, the giant finger effortlessly penetrated the ground, as if it was poking into tofu. As the earth turned over and over, the finger disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared, leaving only a huge hole where the cave used to be. As for the original cave, it had already become a huge pit after the previous movement. After all, the cave was just an ordinary cave. Although it was quite spacious, it was not large enough to accommodate a finger with a diameter of 100 feet. The surrounding walls had already been broken by the finger's several turns, turning the cave into a huge pit. The feeling of extreme danger still existed between Exian's mind and mind. Seeing that Taoist who seemed to be showing signs of loosening up, Exian had no time to say anything. He directly raised his hand and grasped. A mysterious heart force entangled Taoist who. Then the heart force turned and took him and Taoist who straight up. In the blink of an eye, they rushed to the mid-air about 10 miles above the ground. Taoist who had thought that the misfortune was over when he escaped from the finger's crushing. Suddenly, he felt a mysterious force acting on him, pulling him up into the air. If he had not built up absolute trust in Exian in the past 10,000 years, he might have thought that Exian was trying to harm him at this critical moment. At this time, when he was 10 miles above the ground, the mysterious force entangling him suddenly disappeared. Only then did he confirm that his previous confidence was not groundless. But after he was relieved, he was surprised again. Looking down, he could not help but be shocked. Between his mind and mind, countless emotions of lingering fear surged. He saw that the island below suddenly seemed to come alive, and the rocks on the entire island began to violently roll. The sea around the island seemed to be boiling, rolling violently. Suddenly, there was a strange muffled sound in the sky in an unimaginable way, shaking heaven and earth. These muffled sounds were similar to thunder, but they had a completely different quality from natural thunder. They had a kind of power that natural thunder did not have, containing a kind of awe-inspiring aura that seemed to be able to wipe out and destroy everything. At this moment, Exian suddenly felt that the very familiar sense of danger was many times stronger than before. He suddenly looked up, and the horror in his eyes almost condensed. His body could not help but fall down. At this moment, his mind was greatly shocked, and he could not help but instinctively want to stay away from the place where the muffled sound came from. Taoist, who was startled by Exian's reaction. When he looked up, his reaction was even more violent than Exian's. He almost froze there and did not know how to move. At this moment, a strange roar rang out from below, passing through the distance of 10 kilometers and entering their ears. The roar was so loud that it was unimaginable. Even though it had traveled 10 kilometers, the two of them still felt their eardrums tremble. They even felt that their minds had suffered an unimaginable impact from the roar. An unbearable pain occupied all of their senses. What's going on? Exian and Taoist who looked down in astonishment. The island below them had completely collapsed, and a strange stone man was struggling in the ruins of the island. It was as if he was trying to pry open the entrance to hell, and the first thing that appeared in front of them was a huge head. The head was thousands of feet in diameter, and its shape was very strange. It looked like the head of a gorilla, and there was even an outline of hair on it. The head was lifelike, and its face showed an extremely angry expression. At this time, it was roaring at the void above. Then, the head shrunk, and two huge palms stretched out from the hole that the head had drilled out of and tore the hole open as if tearing a piece of paper. The seawater in the surroundings was pushed away, and the remaining rocks on the island were destroyed, so that the two huge palms had a lot of space to move around. Behind the palm were two gigantic arms. After the arms was the head that had appeared once before, and after that was the body. After a while, the huge stone man appeared directly on the surface of the sea. The island had completely disappeared, and it was directly filled up by the surrounding seawater, as if there had never been an island in this location. The man's arms were extremely long, and his head was huge. He had all kinds of characteristics of a gorilla, and he looked like a big-headed gorilla. Although it was not a born Taoism aptitude, the body of the stone man appeared to be extremely harmonious and natural. It was as if every change in the lines and every part of the body had been formed after millions of years of evolution. Every part of the body had its own special meaning, special functions, and special mysteries. This appearance meant nothing to Taoist who, at most, it made him sigh that there was such a creature in the untainted land. But for the human-faced fish, EXIN, the meaning was completely different. For the human-faced fish, EXIN, the image of the stone man gave him a vague sense of indescribable familiarity. This familiarity was mixed with a kind of trembling, as if it was a kind of fear from the bottom of his heart, which made his mind almost go blank. Although the memory of his encounter with Rinzun had been erased by Rinzun with the help of some exquisite and indescribable method, it was, after all, a memory that had once appeared. No matter how it was erased, even with the supreme power of Rinzun as a disbanded immortal of the great all-embracing heaven, it was impossible to erase it as if it had never appeared. Even if it could be done without outsiders noticing, the traces of its existence must still be hidden in a very deep place, and it was impossible for it to completely disappear. This was the law of life, and it could not be reversed by any magical sense. However, if the magical sense was powerful to the extreme, it could make this kind of trace be erased to the greatest extent, and it could escape the perception of others to the greatest extent. That was to say, generally speaking, if a certain part of the memory of a creature was erased by another practitioner, then, generally speaking, as long as the practitioner's cultivation was stronger than that practitioner's, it was possible to recover that part of the memory of the creature that had been erased. Of course, this was only a possibility, and whether or not there was such a method to do so was secondary. Similarly, if the creature itself could reach the realm of that practitioner, it was also possible to use its own magical sense to recover that part of the memory that had been erased. If it happened to Rinzun and the human-faced fish EXIN, the situation would not be much different. Although that part of the human-faced fish EXIN's memory had been erased by Rinzun through some mysterious method, there were still traces of the memory itself left in the depths of its memory. Although it was only a little trace, it was enough to make the human-faced fish EXIN see the most profound picture in its memory again, and it felt familiar. As for EXIN, the most profound memory of that part of the memory was obviously the incredible strength of Rinzun, which was enough to make him feel despair and unimaginable power. Therefore, at this moment, after he saw the stone man that looked like a big-headed gorilla, the remaining traces in the depths of his memory were stimulated. I must have seen a similar creature before. There's no mistake about that. This thought flashed through EXIN's mind. After this thought, another scene appeared in front of him. It was a scene from 11,000 years ago. In that scene, he was floating in a certain sea in a daze. His eyes were filled with confusion and contemplation. He looked up and around, looking very dumb. In his entire life, from the beginning of his birth to this moment, the only memory he had lost was the memory of an unknown length of time 11,000 years ago. At this moment, he felt that it was a little familiar, but he had no impression of it at all. He did not know when he had encountered it or when he had seen a creature of this shape. The only possibility was that it came from that lost memory. After this scene, there was another scene. It was 10,000 years ago. He was floating in the bottom of the sea, but the area around him had a diameter of 100 miles. It was an area of nothingness that was completely isolated from the seawater. An aura of great destruction constantly reverberated around him, as if indicating that some earth-shattering destruction had happened here before. After these two scenes, Exin finally turned around completely. He knew what was waiting for him at this moment. He roared, "The doom is coming. Let's flee in different directions." Then, without waiting for Taoist Hu's answer, he directly chose a direction, activated his heart power, stimulated an incredible speed, and directly shot in that direction. In the blink of an eye, he had turned into a residual shadow and disappeared from Taoist Hu's eyes. At this moment, Taoist Hu realized what Exin had said. Although he had doubts in his heart, his trust in Exin still prevailed. His body shook, and an incomparably domineering shadow of a black tiger flashed behind him. It pounced forward and wrapped his body. It attracted the infinite acquired chi of heaven and earth around him, stimulated the same amazing speed, and directly shot in the other direction from which Exin had come. Although this speed was much slower than the speed of Exin's flying escape, it was also extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared into the distance. At this moment, the stone man completely ignored Taoist Hu. He raised his eyes and looked in the direction where Exin had disappeared. The ferocious and angry expression on his face seemed to change slightly, as if there was an inexplicable smile condensing on his face. The tribulation cloud above seemed to have gathered enough power at this moment. In an instant, it shook, and hundreds of millions of strange powers directly pounced down from the tribulation cloud, directly covering the huge stone man that was a few tens of thousands of feet tall. The stone man was nothing else. After Human Venerable's thoughts entered the island, he directly stimulated the power of the island, so that the infinite chi of heaven and earth contained in the island itself, a large number of materials, as well as the infinite acquired chi of heaven and earth contained in it, were reconstructed, directly producing a result similar to cultivating into a demon. The island suddenly came to life and became a strange stone man that looked like the original body of Human Venerable. It could be said that this stone man could be said to be a different kind of demon clan. It was a kind of demon clan that was forcibly produced by Human Venerable with his supreme cultivation as a disbanded immortal of the great all-embracing heaven. Although this kind of demon clan was only produced in a short period of time, it was, after all, supported by Human Venerable's thoughts. The power of its divine sense was at least comparable to that of a practitioner in the golden immortal realm. If it were not for the fact that time was so short that he could not waste too much time in reconstructing the power of the island, it would not be difficult for the stone man to directly break through the limit of the power of the divine sense and directly become a primordial unity. However, although it was only the power of the divine sense of the golden immortal realm, compared to the current Exin, which was only equivalent to the cultivation of the crossing disaster realm, it was already extremely easy to achieve his goal. As for why the heavenly tribulation only struck after the stone man appeared for so long, it was precisely because the stone man also contained a power that belonged to the great Tianyuan world that was sent out by the Spirit Mountain. The conflict between the power of the great Tianyuan world and the untainted land was even greater than the conflict between Human Venerable himself and the untainted land. Therefore, the reaction of the untainted land was naturally more intense. Precisely because of this, after he was formed, the untainted land would condense more power and be more prepared, so it launched endless tribulations to erase him. This was why the tribulations caused by the stone man took so long to descend, and even gave both the Exin and Taoist Hu time to react. They actually escaped from the range of the tribulations before the tribulations arrived. Human Venerable had long expected the way the tribulations would descend. Naturally, he was not at a loss because of the appearance of the tribulations. There was even a faint smile on his face. He ignored the endless tribulations and let the tribulations bombard the stone man. This time, what appeared in the untainted land was not just his psyche. This psyche also wore two layers of defense. One was the power of the great Tianyuan world that was sent out by the Spirit Mountain, and the other was the demon body that was refined by the island. Naturally, he would not be as embarrassed as last time. The endless tribulations acted on the stone man, but they continuously blasted countless impurities out of the stone man's body. The essence of the stone man became purer, and the power of the stone man became stronger. For the time being, the human venerable's psyche hidden in the stone man's body was not damaged. Tribulations originally had two sides. Even if this kind of tribulations was completely aimed at the outer world, it itself had the characteristics of cultivation tribulations. That was, if one could withstand the harm of the tribulations would bring indescribable benefits to one's cultivation, making the victim's cultivation increase by a considerable amount. At this moment, the endless tribulations were like this for human venerable. Before the tribulations broke through the layers of defense and hurt his psyche, the tribulations would only continue to refine the stone man demon that he had spawned, making the stone man demon's demonic body stronger and purer, making the divine sense power that he could exert in the untainted land more powerful. The Venerable One leisurely enjoyed the improvement of the stone golem's body. He smiled faintly and suddenly stretched out his hand. In an instant, he drilled into the void and grabbed something from an unknown distance away. The Venerable One's hand shrank and grabbed something from an unknown distance away. When he opened his palm, it was the human-faced fish's psyche. "Little guy, you triggered my tribulation of becoming a demon. How can I let you go just like that?" The human venerable laughed and said to the psyche, who was at a loss. Of course, he could not directly say that he was here to help the psyche improve its cultivation, so he casually found such an excuse. Well, Xian had already flown hundreds of thousands of miles away, and even the tribulation clouds had only become a small dot. Suddenly, he discovered that a huge hand had pierced through the void, and before he could react, he was caught in the palm of the hand. With another flash, he had returned to the center of the tribulation clouds and appeared within the boundless tribulation. In front of him, there was a huge rock head. Under such circumstances, the stone man suddenly said such a thing. How could he face it calmly? At that moment, he could only say, "I was rash. I hope Senior can be magnanimous." Although there were boundless tribulations enveloping him, his mind wasn't harmed at all. When the tribulations approached his body, they seemed to be blocked by an indescribable force and were separated from his body, unable to harm him at all. Well said, well said. Since you've triggered my tribulation of becoming a demon, you must help me get through this tribulation. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste of time?" The human sovereign laughed. The Xian was not really stupid. With the extremely familiar sense of danger in his heart, how could he believe what the stone man said? However, at this moment, he was like a piece of meat on the chopping block, so how could he possibly put up any effective resistance? He could only force himself to say, "My cultivation is low. I'm afraid I can't help you." "Don't worry, I will have the strength." Rinzun chuckled. He raised his hand and pressed on his chest, directly pressing his mind into his chest. Baidu search bubble book read. Chapter 744. When Xian heard the stone man's words, he was confused. Suddenly, he discovered that an indescribably powerful force had locked onto him, supporting his body straight towards the stone man's heart. It was like a huge stone wall that supported the heavens. That speed, that power, made him feel as though he was about to be pressed into minced meat. Just as this thought had yet to pass through his mind, before even the fear in his heart had completely emerged, he suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if he had suddenly passed through an incomparably mysterious barrier. Although it existed, it did not produce any effect, and it only made him slightly aware of it. After passing through the barrier, he felt that there was nothing in front of him. Suddenly, he arrived in another mysterious world. This world is composed of countless rays of light. There was an incomparably huge ball of light that was like the sun. It was extremely dazzling, and if one stared at it for a short while, they would feel a piercing pain in their eyes. They even felt that their entire body and existence was about to be melted by the light emitted by this ball of light, turning into nothingness and eventually disappearing from the world. Beyond the most dazzling light of the pattern, huge rivers of light pierce through the light, connecting to the faraway ends of the world. Indescribably mysterious existences constantly expanded and expanded from the huge rivers of light, and every time they expanded and expanded, it would drive the endless, unimaginably mysterious power to go through some kind of cycle. This cycle was extremely mysterious, and it gave off an unfathomable vitality, as if it was this vitality that drove the entire giant stone man to become a living creature, allowing the body to produce unimaginable miraculous effects and possess unimaginable divine abilities. EXIN was slightly stunned. He felt as if he had seen the source of life at this moment. He suddenly had a feeling that as long as he completely understood what he was seeing, he would be able to create all kinds of living beings and give life to all inanimate objects. It's just, apparently, a feeling. The laws that these lights operated according to were extremely profound and profound. With the human-faced fish will's current cultivation state, current knowledge, current cultivation state, at most, he could only vaguely feel the incredible mysteries contained within, the principles that were enough for him to gain endless benefits. If he wanted to truly understand the mysteries within, if his cultivation state did not increase, even if he had millions of years, he would only be able to grasp the surface of it. It was absolutely impossible to create all kinds of living beings at will and give life to inanimate objects. At this time, Lua did not think of these. He was extremely greedy to understand the mysteries of the world of light in front of him. He tried his best to understand the principles that he hoped to obtain. He even completely forgot where he was at this moment, why he came here, and the fate that he would encounter after coming here. At this moment, an indescribably terrifying power reminded him. An earth-shattering force suddenly attacked him from behind, directly blasting his body, making him feel like an ant being pushed by a giant. He was unable to resist and directly rushed towards the huge ball of light in front of him, which made him feel like he was being melted by the light and turned into nothingness just by looking at it. In the blink of an eye, he crossed an unknown distance and crashed into the huge ball of light in front of him without any resistance. During this process, the heart of the human-faced fish finally recalled why it had come here and what the huge stone man had said before it came here. He could not help but feel a sense of confusion. What is going on? This confusion was mixed with the fear and despair of his body crashing into an incomparably huge and scorching object without being able to resist at all. It caused his face to become dull for a moment, and his body seemed to have become a stone statue, unable to move at all. The moment it collided with the ball of light, EXIN suddenly felt as if an endless amount of power was forcefully shoved into its body. His entire body felt as if it was about to explode from this power. It felt as if even his spirit and mind were about to be crushed into powder by this earth-shattering power. EXIN couldn't help but let out an earth-shattering scream. As soon as the scream came out, he felt that something was wrong. He suddenly looked forward and suddenly found that his perspective had changed from the wondrous world of light to the boundless sea of tribulations. He was no longer surrounded by the ball of light and river of light from before. Instead, he was surrounded by endless tribulations. Lowering his head to take a look, he realized that his body had turned into a giant stone man. Tilting his head to the side, he could hear the thumping of his heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. An incomparably powerful and terrifying heartbeat could be heard from within his body. The energy that felt like it was about to explode and crush his soul and spirit into dust had become extremely tamed and could be used as he pleased. With just a thought, it instantly turned from an incomparably berserk state to an incomparably calm one. The feeling that he was about to explode and the feeling of being crushed into dust had completely disappeared in an instant. Instead, it was replaced with an indescribable satisfaction. It was a satisfaction of controlling boundless power and becoming incomparably powerful. It was a satisfaction of possessing boundless and terrifying power. This sense of satisfaction made him unable to help but reveal an almost dazed smile. At this moment, the boundless tribulations around him suddenly trembled, and their power underwent a miraculous change, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably. The tremors finally brought him back to his senses, and he finally found that the boundless tribulations around him were constantly destroying his body. Endless pain was constantly being transmitted to his mind and mind. The pain was so intense that he even felt like his mind was about to be completely drowned by it. The various emotions and thoughts that had appeared before seemed to be completely erased by the pain. At this moment, the human-faced fish heart finally understood what the stone man had meant before. The stone man demon had actually directly let him control his body and completely fuse his life with him, allowing him to control his body to resist the so-called tribulation of becoming a demon. No wonder he said that he wanted him to help him transcend the tribulation, and no wonder he said that he would have the power to do so. Understanding this, EXIN felt an indescribable sense of fear surge up, and this fear even directly suppressed the endless pain that his body was currently experiencing. How could this be? Transcending a tribulation is a situation where a cultivator is extremely selfish. How can there be a method for another cultivator to help him transcend a tribulation? Also, what kind of tribulation is this? Just the aura alone is enough to make people collapse. Wouldn't it be suicide for me to face it myself? These chaotic thoughts flashed through EXIN's mind. Haha, now that you and I are together, unless we can survive the tribulation, both of us will die. Hurry up and think of a way to survive the tribulation. There's no use in letting your thoughts run wild. At this moment, an incomparably loud voice rang out in Caring Heart's mind. This was the voice of the stone man. Hey, who are you, senior? Why are you doing this? I'm just a small cultivator, and I haven't even achieved immortality yet. How can I help you transcend the tribulation? Senior, you're just dragging me down by doing this. It might greatly reduce the chances of you transcending the tribulation. Why don't you just let me go? Senior, you'll have a greater chance of success if you do it yourself. EXIN was greatly alarmed and hurriedly cried out. Yes, that seems to be true. Although I don't have any cultivation methods, your strength is so weak. You might really be a burden to me and greatly reduce the chances of me transcending the tribulation. That loud and stiff voice seemed to be moved by EXIN's words. That's right. Then let me go. That way, it'll be good for Senior and for me. EXIN was overjoyed. All right, since that's the case, you're useless to me. Then you'll pay the price for triggering my tribulation to become a demon and causing me to fall between life and death. The voice suddenly said. Following this voice, there was an indescribable killing intent that suddenly poured into the mind of the mind instructs in a second. Following that, a faintly discernible repulsive force was suddenly produced, and the tribulation surged towards the mind instructs in a second, as if it could directly crush the mind instructs in a second, into pieces, turning the mind instructs in a second, into dust. EXIN was shocked. She had never thought that such a change would suddenly appear. However, a thought flashed through her mind, and she knew how foolish her previous actions were. This stone man looked stupid, but in reality, he was very intelligent. How could a few words from her be able to move him? Moreover, even if he was moved, how could he possibly let her go as she said? According to what she said, it was the EXIN who triggered her tribulation. It could be said that she was the culprit who trapped him in this life and death situation. Even if she didn't need him, she would most likely kill him along the way. How could she possibly let her go as she said? Understanding this, the first thought that came to his mind was, no wonder my mental cultivation method has never been able to reach completion. So it turns out that my mind is still blinded by fear, and I still make incomparably stupid decisions between life and death. After this thought, he instantly regained his rationality and directly suppressed these messy thoughts. He shouted, "Stop! I have a miraculous cultivation method that will definitely be of benefit to Senior's tribulation. Senior, please allow me to do my best for Senior's tribulation." But your strength is so weak. The stone man seemed to be a little hesitant. However, Even though he was only hesitating, the power that wanted to completely crush his will and make his soul scatter and his body vanish had stopped after all. It did not continue to crush him, only lingering around him, faintly suppressing him. The human-faced fish's mind cursed the stone man in her heart for being disgusting, but she could only continue speaking. "Senior, you're worrying too much. Although my strength is weak, the inheritance of my sect is extensive and profound. I have my own methods to control great strength, and I will definitely be of benefit to Senior." "Is that so?" The stone man seemed to be hesitating. At this moment, the endless tribulations around her changed again. The stone man's body shook more and more, as if it could no longer completely resist the attacks of the tribulations with its own defense. Agitated, the stone man seemed to have finally made up his mind. He said, "All right, then I'll believe you this time. Quickly take out your means to resist this tribulation." With these words, the power that seemed to want to completely annihilate the mind instantly disappeared, and the mind also regained the feeling of controlling endless power in the stone man's body. However, this feeling was not wonderful. The endless pain brought by the tribulations was also transmitted into his mind at the same time, constantly reminding him that he could not enjoy the pleasure brought by the endless power at this moment. He was reminding him that if he did not do anything, what awaited him would be disappearing from this world along with the stone man. In this situation, he did not dare to be careless. With a thought, the power in the stone man's body instantly trembled and suddenly quickly circulated through his body, slightly carrying the nature of heart force. If the power in the stone man was only at the level of the mind's power, even if it was tens or hundreds of times stronger, this action would be enough to completely convert the power in his body into heart force. However, at this moment, the power in the stone man's body was more than millions of times stronger than the mind's. No matter how hard he tried, he could only make this power carry a little bit of the nature of heart force. It was absolutely impossible for him to completely convert it into heart force and use it as he pleased. However, even if this power only carried a little bit of the nature of heart force, the willpower's control over this vast power had increased by thousands of times, and the power that it could unleash had also increased by more than thousands of times. With a slight thought, his power suddenly shook, and then it turned into countless different powers that rushed out of the apertures all over his body. In an instant, it met the infinite tribulations that were violently destroying his body, and it directly annihilated the infinite tribulations. His surroundings suddenly became empty at this moment. The endless tribulations and the power he unleashed completely disappeared without a trace. His surroundings became empty. As far as the eye could see, there was only the pitch-black tribulation cloud above him, which was brewing endless brutality at all times, and the sea below him. This change was very natural for the human venerable who had turned into a stone man. He knew better than anyone else what the power in the stone man's body could do. However, this change made the mind feel a little dumbfounded. How is this possible? How can the power of this stone monster be so mysterious? I clearly just used the nature of heart force to trigger its own power. How can this wave of tribulations be eliminated so easily? Furthermore, after eliminating the calamity, not much power was lost. In a breath's time, he had completely recovered. What kind of body is this? How could such a nondescript body possess such power? Wolexion's mind was filled with these endless and complicated thoughts. Wolexion's mind and Will were filled with endless thoughts. As a cultivator who had inherited the method of Shangqing Lingua Jinren, the orthodox status of the born Taoism aptitude was definitely engraved in the depths of his heart and could not be shaken. In this case, the body that the stone monster had transformed into his naturally a nondescript body. No matter what, the power it possessed was definitely not comparable to that of the born Taoism aptitude. This was also the only sense of superiority that the mind had over the stone monster, and the reason why he faintly looked down on the stone monster in the depths of his heart. However, at this moment, he suddenly realized that the body that looked like a big-headed gorilla actually had such incredible power such amazing recovery ability, and the tempering and control of power had actually reached such an unimaginable level. How could he not be shocked and find it hard to accept? Could it be that there's a body structure that is even more mysterious than the born Taoism aptitude in this world? Could it be that what the teacher said is not correct? A kind of doubt suddenly arose in the depths of his heart. Although this doubt was small, it was planted in the depths of his heart like a seed. It did not appear at this time, but it would definitely grow and grow in the future and eventually produce unpredictable consequences. At this moment, the tribulation clouds in the sky shook, and suddenly, there were endless tribulations that were 100 times more powerful and numerous than before that shrouded the stone man. It directly pulled the mind of the mind out of its shock, so that it could only focus its mind on this strange tribulation of becoming a demon in front of it. It was still using the same method as before, but this time, its control was more refined, and the application of power became more exquisite, and the result was also more perfect. However, it directly eliminated this wave of tribulations without even causing any noise. It was as if the tribulations were just countless phantoms that just pounced over and directly disappeared after attaching to the body. However, this did not mean that the tribulations would be passed so easily. Don't forget that this tribulation was the primordial world's tribulation of extinction in order to erase the existence of any other perfect world. Before the consciousness of the Venerable One disappeared, this tribulation would only become more and more powerful, and its wisdom would become more and more terrifying, but it would never disappear. There was no such thing as passing through. Therefore, the more effective and exquisite the resistance of the mind, the more powerful the power of the tribulation would be. Next, countless tribulations that were thousands of times more powerful than before came from all over the sky, directly enveloping the stone man. The mind could only calm itself down and continue to work hard to control the power in the stone man's body to fight against the tribulations, but to eliminate the tribulations. Just like that, one wave of tribulations came after another. Each wave of tribulations was so powerful that the mind thought that the tribulations were already at their strongest state, but the next wave of tribulations would be impossibly stronger by 1,000 times. Soon, the mind could no longer deal with the tribulations easily, and the mind could no longer free itself from them. It could only throw itself into the fight against the tribulations, trying its best to use its imagination to deal with the strange tribulations that seemed to be growing stronger and stronger without end, to be continued. Baidu Search Bubble Book Reading. Chapter 745. Although the stone demon refined by the human venerable with the help of the island contained incredible power and was even comparable to a golden immortal, it was only comparable to a golden immortal. When facing the boundless tribulations that rose without end, with the strength at the golden immortal realm, how could he possibly deal with them with ease and remain unharmed at all? As the tribulations increased, after dozens of waves, the power in the stone demon's body could no longer completely eliminate the tribulations. More and more tribulations bombarded the stone man, causing him to suffer more and more serious injuries. Fortunately, the stone man had all kinds of special abilities. Although his injuries were getting more and more serious, he could still rely on his own strength and the magic of his body to recover after each wave of tribulations. Then, he could face the next wave of even more terrifying and powerful tribulations in the same perfect state. Instead of letting the injuries accumulate, he would eventually fall not from the powerful tribulations, but from the various injuries he had previously suffered. However, this was only temporary. When the power of the tribulations continued to increase like this, there would be a moment when it would break through the resistance of the various abilities of the stone demon. In the end, the stone demon would be completely destroyed, turning it into nothingness in the tribulations. It would die, its Tao would vanish, and its soul would scatter. Whether it was the human sovereign or the human-faced fish, they both knew this very well. However, the human sovereign had already expected this and had made all sorts of perfect preparations, while the human-faced fish could only endure it head-on. Various thoughts of despair, even grew in its heart. Apart from gathering all of its potential to deal with these tribulations, there was no other way to change its fate of walking towards destruction. This despair made him unable to hold back at all. He no longer thought about why his situation had suddenly become like this. Why did he suddenly encounter such a life-or-death tribulation when he was living a good life? There was only one thought left in his mind, and that was to resist these tribulations. With this thought, he circulated the only mental cultivation method he possessed to the extreme. He constantly deduced and familiarized himself with the various methods recorded in the mental cultivation method. In the end, he even deduced and used various methods that he would never have been able to use before. He deduced the further changes of the methods recorded in the mental cultivation method. With the circulation of this mental cultivation method, he gradually discovered many of the mistakes he had made in the past tens of thousands of years of cultivating this mental cultivation method, and he saw the answers to many of the questions he had accumulated in the past tens of thousands of years. Normally, even a single one of such gains would make him happy and excited for a few tens of days. But at this moment, under the boundless tribulations that were improving at all times, he couldn't pay any attention to these improvements at all. To him, these improvements only allowed him to resist one or two more tribulations in the boundless tribulations, and it couldn't change his fate of being destroyed along with the stone demon in the end. Senior, are you going to let me resist these tribulations by myself? You must know that this body belongs to you. If I fail, not only will I die, but even you won't be able to live. EXIN shouted in his mind. Ha! What can I do? You're doing much better than me. If I were to resist, I might have already failed. Capable people do more work. You'll bear our fates. There's no one else to rely on now. The stone demon's voice flowed through EXIN's mind, causing him to grit his teeth. He was so stifled that he almost roared out loud. From the looks of it, he was clearly going to be a hands-off boss. How could EXIN be happy about this? Although he wanted to go on strike to see if the stone demon was really as reckless as he said and accept his fate and die, he was still rational. He knew that he could not take the risk. He could only continue to resist the endless tribulations helplessly. The power of the endless tribulations grew stronger and stronger, and the EXIN's circulation of the mental cultivation method became faster and faster. As the mental cultivation method circulated, the power within the stone demon's body gradually changed. The nature of the mental force within the vast power became more and more obvious. It became more and more important in the nature of the stone demon's power. If the Rinzuin were to rely on the body of the stone demon to cultivate and seek the Tao, it would naturally be unacceptable. This was because it would change the nature of the power he possessed, making it difficult for the power to adapt to his own cultivation method and soul. As a result, his path of seeking the Tao would become even longer, and his path of cultivation would become even more tortuous. However, it was obvious that the Venerable One did not need the body of the stone demon to help him cultivate and pursue the Tao. What he needed was for this body to be able to occasionally meet the will of the human-faced fish so that he could cultivate his mental cultivation method to the highest level. Thus, at this moment, he only watched indifferently. He did not make any move to stop it. In fact, he even seemed a little satisfied. As for the significance of this change, to EXIN, it was completely different from what it meant to the human sovereign. To him, this change only had endless benefits and not the slightest bit of harm. This was because the power within the stone demon's body was extremely vast compared to his mind. It was almost tens of thousands of times stronger than his own power. Turning this power that was tens of thousands of times stronger than his own power into the nature of his own power was equivalent to allowing him to sense the state of the next realm in advance. It allowed him to sense the power of the divine abilities that could only be obtained after a breakthrough in his cultivation. In this way, one could imagine how great the benefits would be. The power within the stone demon's body became more and more tainted with the nature of the mental force. EXIN's use of this power became more and more perfect. It became more and more perfect. This allowed the power of the various methods recorded in the mental cultivation method to become more and more powerful. As a result, his resistance against the boundless tribulations became more and more effective. Although it didn't make it easier for him to deal with the boundless tribulations, at the very least, it made it so that his performance wouldn't become more and more miserable. Instead, he was barely able to maintain the state that he was in, albeit a little miserable, but still able to hold on. In the blink of an eye, 3 days and 3 nights passed. During these 3 days and 3 nights, the tribulation clouds in the sky continuously condensed and became thicker and thicker. The aura of power that came from them also became more and more terrifying. The power of the tribulations that poured down was hundreds of times stronger than the previous wave. At this moment, it had already reached an indescribable level. If it was not for the special nature of the space-time of the primordial world, which could not be damaged without the corresponding cultivation realm, any wave of the tribulations that appeared in the 3 days would probably be able to shatter a large area of space-time, turning a large area into chaos. Such terrifying tribulations covered the heavens and earth. It was easy to imagine how much pressure it was to the mind. At this moment, he didn't even have the mood to complain. There wasn't the slightest trace of distracting thoughts left in his mind. Only the heart cultivation method was being split and recombined in an unimaginable manner. It gave rise to boundless techniques that were related to it, but possessed profundities of their own. At a certain moment, the stone man's body suddenly shook, and in an instant, an indescribable force suddenly rushed out from the stone demon's body, and from the acupoints all over his body with a loud bang. These powers were extremely mysterious and profound, as if there were endless changes contained within them at all times. They constantly emitted a power of the mind, and contained a strange feeling of being able to change at will. This was none other than the mental power that the mind itself possessed. However, the amount of mental power was extremely vast. It had even reached a point where the mind could not imagine when it would be able to possess such a huge amount of mental power. As the mental power left his body, the stone golem's body trembled again. Suddenly, it seemed to be made of plasticine, and its image began to gradually change. The speed of the change was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the stone golem's body had completely disappeared. Replacing it was the appearance of a huge, innate Taoist physique that was hundreds of thousands of meters tall. From the looks of it, it was 70 to 80% similar to the innate Taoist physique that the human-faced fish heart had obtained. Following the completion of this body, the vast and mighty heart force that had left the acupuncture points around his body seemed to be affected by an indescribable attractive force. With a gentle contraction, it had completely retracted from the acupuncture points around his body. In the blink of an eye, it had completely returned to his body, as though it had never left his body. At this moment, the tribulation clouds in the sky paused slightly. In an extremely rare moment, they did not continue to send down the endless tribulations. Instead, they seemed to be confused. They slowly surged in the sky and brewed, causing a rare moment of peace to appear in the world. The stone golem was slightly stunned. When he looked down at his body, he discovered that it was different. He could not help but reveal a look of surprise. All the power has turned into mental power, and my body has also changed. Does this mean that I have completely refined this body and completely broken away from the stone golem's control? The stone golem was the will heart. He discovered the changes in his body and thought to himself in surprise, this body doesn't seem too bad. At this moment, a loud voice suddenly flowed through the mind of the will heart. Then, the will heart suddenly felt that all its senses towards its body had completely disappeared. It seemed to have returned to the ball of light that was emitting endless light. Everything that had happened in the past 3 days and 3 nights seemed to be a dream. This experience made him instantly understand that he had been overthinking. Although his body had changed and his power had been completely transformed into heart force, this body still did not belong to him. This body still belonged to the stone demon. To the stone demon, he was still just an ant. If he wanted to escape from this fate of certain death, he still had a long way to go. This kind of understanding made him feel a little discouraged. After being discouraged, he began to worry about the fate that he would encounter next. It seems that this stone demon no longer needs me. Is it going to crush me to death like he said before? Or is it going to let me go because of my help in the past 3 days? These two choices were a matter of a year for the stone demon. But to the will, it was the distance between life and death. Naturally, he could not remain indifferent. Just as he was feeling uneasy, a flustered and exasperated voice flowed through his mind. Switch people, switch people. Then he felt his body swell up. The feeling of being in the ball of light had completely disappeared. Replacing it was the feeling of regaining control of endless power and an incomparably powerful body. He had regained control of the body and power of the stone demon. However, after regaining control of the body and power, he realized why the voice had become so flustered and exasperated. This was because at this moment, the surrounding tribulations had suddenly become hundreds of thousands of times stronger than the previous wave. This kind of increase was more than 1,000 times stronger than the previous wave of tribulations. It was no wonder that the stone demon could not react in time. Seeing the boundless tribulations envelop his body, the will could not help but rejoice that he had escaped the fate of death and regained control of this boundless power and powerful body. In the blink of an eye, all of the distracting thoughts in his mind disappeared, leaving behind only the many methods derived from the mental cultivation method shining brightly. At this moment, the vast mental power in the stone demon's body began to circulate. As the boundless power flowed, his body began to shine with endless light. Countless strange phantoms suddenly condensed around his body. These phantoms were very strange. Each of them seemed to correspond to a certain legendary powerful artifact. This correspondence was not only in form, but also the power of the artifact seemed to be contained in the phantoms, so that his body was shrouded in the defense power of countless magical artifacts. In an instant, the will exerted the characteristics of the mental power to the extreme, directly simulating the artifacts that appeared in the various legends of the untainted land that he had heard from Taoists who when he traveled in the sea area over the years. Because of the magical use of the mental power, the mysterious power of those artifacts was directly simulated. Some of these objects existed in history, some didn't. But whether they existed or not in history, they must have had earth-shattering divine power in the legends. After these divine powers were simulated by the mental power, one could imagine how terrifying the effect would be. Although the power of the boundless tribulations was great, the power was scattered all over the body of the stone demon. Under the power of the simulated artifacts, it was difficult to break through the barrier. In a short while, the tribulation was exhausted and completely eliminated. As this wave of tribulations was eliminated, the tribulation cloud in the sky paused again. For a moment, no more tribulations came down, and the world fell into a rare peace again. But this time, the will no longer paid attention to this rare peace. At this moment, his mind had indeed entered an incomparably mysterious state. Heaven and earth had completely disappeared from his senses. Time and space had completely ceased to exist. Even his own body, even his own existence, had already vanished in a thin air. In his senses, there was only an incomparably vast amount of heart energy churning, surging, charging, flowing towards an extremely mysterious and unfathomable direction towards a realm that he had always dreamt of. As the mental power surged, he only felt that he had broken through all the invisible barriers that had shackled his realm in the past. During this process, his spirit continued to grow and rise until it finally reached an indescribable height that he could look down on the past. In a trance, the surging power of the heart broke through a certain barrier, instantly breaking away from the original surging state, and an indescribable order was instantly established. The nature of the mental power had instantly increased by more than 100 times. The degree of purity, the degree of concentration, and the degree of toughness had all increased by more than 100 times. and Thule also instantly understood what had happened to him. So, this is what it feels like to have completed a mental cultivation method. He let out a long sigh and suddenly felt a sense of satisfaction. Even if he were to die now, he would no longer have any regrets. At this moment, he suddenly felt a bit of light appear in the depths of his mind. This bit of light contained a large amount of information. This information was extremely mysterious and could not be described with words. However, this information allowed him to instantly understand what he needed to do to find his teacher, Shang-Qing Lingua, and how to become her disciple. It's finally done. At the same time, far away in another small world, the human venerable let out a long sigh. He looked at the shadow in front of him. In the shadow, the human-faced fish, Exin, was controlling the body of the stone demon. However, for the first time, when he looked at Exin, his eyes did not show disdain or dissatisfaction. Instead, there was a faint solemnity. This solemnity was naturally not directed at Exin. At this time, even if Exin had completed a mental cultivation method, her realm was at most equivalent to the peak of the crossing disaster realm. She had not even reached the itinerant immortal realm. So how could he be moved? The reason why he felt solemn was because of the cultivation world of the untainted world behind Exin. In other words, it could also be said that Exin's teacher, Shang-Qing Lingua, and the terrifying existence behind her, who had created her cultivation method. I didn't expect that she would actually use strength to prove her Tao. At this moment, the human venerable's mind and will had such a thought. Baidu Search Bubble Book Reading. Chapter 746. The way of proving one's way. The way of proving one's way through strength was not like the legendary method of becoming a sage. Instead, it was a cultivation method that relied on power far beyond one's realm to forcibly break through the bottleneck that shackled one's realm, thereby allowing one's cultivation to break through. Even if one used this method to break through the Qi refinement realm and achieve the core realm, it was still proving one's way through strength, but it was not limited to the breakthrough of becoming a sage. Generally speaking, it was not difficult to prove one's way through strength at the beginning of the world, because at that time, all the living creatures in the world were born with great power. More importantly, the cultivation methods of the living creatures at that time were not perfect. Only by accumulating enough power could one naturally break through the realm and prove one's way through strength. Apart from a situation at the beginning of the world, in the later generations, when the civilization of cultivation became more and more prosperous and the methods of cultivation became more and more perfect, the method of using strength to prove one's way became extremely difficult and clumsy in comparison. Compared to naturally breaking through and advancing according to the method of cultivation, using strength to prove one's way was not advantageous at all. Naturally, it became less and less common. Precisely because of this, the more prosperous the cultivation civilization was, the less likely it was to prove one's way through strength. From these points of view, proving one's way through strength seemed to be a crude and barbaric method. It was only a choice made when the cultivation method was not perfect. But in reality, only the human venerable who came from the great Tianyuan world knew the difficulty of proving one's way through strength. From the creation of the great heaven primordial world to the time when the human sovereign left, it was unknown how many trillions of yuanwees had passed. The length of time was so long that even Luo Fan could not imagine it. Under such circumstances, the great Tianyuan world had experienced countless changes in the world. The primordial Qi in the world had long transformed into the most stable postnatal primordial Qi of heaven and earth. It had not changed for billions of years. The cultivation civilization had gone through trillions of periods of development and had long flourished to an unbelievable extent. It was tens of thousands of times more prosperous than the untainted world had been at its most prosperous state before the great tribulation of heaven and earth. In such a prosperous cultivation civilization, the study of various cultivation methods and theories had long reached a state that was close to the origin. The cultivation method of proving one's way through strength was naturally within the scope of research. It could even be said to be an extremely important research subject. Therefore, the human venerable who came from the great Tianyuan world had a deeper understanding of the various characteristics of using strength to prove one's Tao than anyone in the untainted land, even Luo Fan. Although his understanding was limited to understanding, which was not enough for him to create a sufficiently exquisite method of using strength to prove one's Tao, it was enough for him to have some understanding of the conditions for using strength to prove one's Tao. Due to these various reasons, the human venerable one realized that proving one's Tao through strength was not as crude and unreasonable as most living beings thought. It was a helpless choice that could only be made when one's cultivation method was imperfect. Instead, it was an extremely exquisite method that was even more compatible with the great Tao of heaven and earth than any other method in the world. It was even more compatible with the rules and laws of nature. This was because the breakthrough obtained through proving one's way through strength was the breakthrough with the most stable foundation. What was achieved after the breakthrough would also be the most compatible with the essence of the new realm and the most profound existence of the realm. This kind of existence would have an advantage that other cultivation methods could not compare to when cultivating in the new realm. Not only would they be able to increase their cultivation speed to a level that other cultivation methods could not compare to, but they could also create a cultivation method that was most suitable for them based on their compatibility with the new realm and the depth of their origin. Since there were so many benefits to proving one's way through strength, why didn't all the living beings in the great Tianyuan world choose this method to cultivate? Why were there still so many cultivation methods that were as numerous as the grains of sand in the Ganges River? Why weren't people working hard to develop these cultivation methods and pushing the method of proving one's Tao to an unimaginable peak? The reason was naturally because even though there were so many benefits to attaining one's Tao through strength, it was truly too difficult. It was so difficult that even though there were endless benefits, if one stubbornly insisted on using this method to cultivate, the gains would not make up for the losses. It was even enough to directly destroy the prosperous cultivation civilization. Proving one's way through strength seemed to be using power that surpassed one's own realm to forcefully break through the bottleneck of cultivation, thus achieving the goal of breaking through to the next realm. It seemed very crude and did not have much profoundness. Of course, that was not the case. In reality, the most important thing to prove one's way through strength was that the power had to have enough vitality, and a sufficient degree of compatibility with the ways. If a cultivator's power didn't have these characteristics, then they wouldn't be able to forcibly break through to the next realm. Instead, it would be more likely for their body to explode. Their body would explode, and their spirit would be destroyed by the power that surpassed their cultivation level, causing them to die and their spirit to dissipate. This was the legendary Qi deviation. It was precisely because of this premise that more living beings used this method to make breakthroughs at the beginning of the world. This was because at that time, the world was filled with endless chaotic Yuan Qi and innate Yuan Qi. The living beings who cultivated were mostly innate gods born from the world, rather than the postnatal living beings that were born from other living beings. Innate gods were born from the world, so they naturally had an indescribable degree of compatibility with the world. It could even be said that they were the embodiment of the natural laws of the world. These beings absorbed the power that contained endless mysterious chaotic Yuan Qi and innate Yuan Qi to cultivate, so they naturally possessed great vitality and abundant vitality. They also had a sufficiently strong degree of compatibility with the ways. With this kind of power, they naturally had the qualifications to prove one's way through strength. This was why the cultivation method of proving one's way through strength came into existence. It mostly appeared at the beginning of the world, when the innate gods were active in the world. It was precisely because the human venerable one knew these characteristics of proving one's Tao through strength that he was shocked when he saw the human face fish's intent using strength to prove one's Tao, and felt threatened by the existence of the human face fish's sect. A postnatal living being who cultivates a method that can barely surpass the path of immortality and achieve immortality, actually has the qualifications to prove one's way through strength. It looks like the human-faced fish's sect is even more powerful than I thought. The human venerable frowned and thought. The human-faced fish was a living being born from the crossbreeding of two kinds of marine living beings, so it was naturally a postnatal living being. It was incomparably different from the innate gods that existed at the beginning of the primordial world. At that moment, most of the yuan qi in the world had already transformed into postnatal yuan qi, let alone chaotic yuan qi. Even innate yuan qi only took up an extremely small portion. Under these circumstances, ordinary living beings who absorbed yuan qi from the outside world would definitely not have the qualifications to prove one's way through strength. Even if there were living beings who could defy the heavens and cultivate such a power, they would definitely have to have great fortune and obtain an unimaginable opportunity to change the nature of their power. This would allow their power to possess sufficient vitality, life force, and compatibility with the great Tao. Clearly, these special circumstances did not exist for the human-faced fish, Exin. Since tens of thousands of years ago, the human venerable had been observing the heart of the human-faced fish, observing every single bit of progress in his cultivation, observing every single circulation of his cultivation method, and observing every single trace of power that he absorbed from the outside world. As a result, he was incomparably clear that the power his mind currently possessed was completely cultivated with the help of the mental cultivation method. There was not a single bit of luck within it, nor was there any other opportunity to change the nature of his power. Under these circumstances, the strength of the heart cultivated by the Exin actually possessed the qualifications to prove one's way through strength. This was enough to prove that the cultivation method cultivated by the Exin was absolutely exquisite to an unimaginable level. At the very least, its compatibility with the supreme great Tao of this world was absolutely strong to an unimaginable level. Only because of this, the strength of the heart cultivated by the Exin would be so profound, and only then would it possess the qualifications to prove one's way through strength. This understanding allowed him to instantly know that the existence who had created this cultivation method was countless times more powerful than he had expected when he first saw it. Under these circumstances, how could he calmly face the sect behind the human-faced fish Exin? After various thoughts flashed through his mind, the grave expression on the human venerable's face gradually faded. Excitement and anticipation gradually appeared on his face. After finding out that the sect behind the human-faced fish Exin was more powerful than he had expected, the human venerable felt even more grateful for the decision he had made 11,000 years ago. He also looked forward to enlightened master Shanxing Lingua's cultivation method even more. If the cultivation method is so compatible with this world, then I'll be able to comprehend the source of cultivation in this world more easily. At that time, this world will no longer be an obstacle to me, and completing the mission given to me by the Lord will no longer be a problem. The human venerable's thoughts continuously reverberated in his mind. After that thought, his mind once again attached itself to the stone demon in a certain sea region of the untainted world. At this moment, the Exin had already used the method of proving one's way through strength to directly break through to great success in the cultivation method. This was several times faster than he had expected, so he naturally no longer had any thoughts of continuing to endure the bombardment of the endless tribulations here. In any case, he had already made ample preparations for the power of the untainted world to invade the small world he was in. Rather than waiting for the bit of will and power he had left in the untainted world to be blasted away and the power directly invade the small world, he might as well directly withdraw his will from the untainted world and direct the power into the small world. That way, he could also save a bit of the loss of will and power. After returning to the body of the stone demon, the human venerable found that the body of the stone demon seemed to have suddenly become many times stronger. In the midst of the endless tribulations that were hundreds or thousands of times stronger than normal, it seemed to be at ease. As it casually pointed, the illusory objects displayed unimaginable power, directly eliminating the waves of tribulations. But it seemed extremely easy. What a pity. This body of the stone demon can be used more by this kid, but there are too many traces of me on it. If enlightened master linguist saw it, he would definitely find something wrong. So I can only destroy it, the human venerable said with a sigh. It was not that he had any good feelings towards the human-faced fish, but he felt that it was absolutely impossible for him to become stronger. Although he had constantly observed the heart of the human-faced fish for tens of thousands of years, to him, this was equivalent to observing an ant for a few breaths of time. How could he develop any feelings for it? The reason why he felt that it was a pity was because of the body of the stone demon that he had condensed. Although the body of the stone demon had been condensed casually by him, it was, after all, his creation. After seeing that his creation could display power that was far beyond what he had expected before creating it, he wanted to destroy it. Even if he was already a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven and had an extremely firm will, it was impossible for him not to feel anything. It was not strange at all to feel that it was a pity. Although it was a pity, the human venerable obviously would not take risks for such a feeling of pity. Therefore, there was a long sigh that instantly flowed through the mind of the human-faced fish. It's a pity that my willpower can no longer bear this tribulation. Otherwise, I'm afraid there would really be hope for me to pass this tribulation of becoming a demon. The mind was very carefreely squandering the endless power of the heart, experiencing all kinds of improvements and all kinds of changes that this method of cultivating the mind had brought to itself. When it suddenly heard this sentence, it couldn't help but be startled and said in surprise, "Senior, why do you say this? I see that your body is strong and stable, your power is vast and boundless, and your mind is even more tenacious. How can your willpower be unable to bear it?" In the beginning, although he was very reluctant to help the stone demon cross the tribulation in this state, at this moment he had obtained countless benefits and had broken through the bottleneck that he had not broken through for thousands of years. The little bit of rejection in his heart for this state had long disappeared. On the contrary, because at this time he could wantonly squander the endless power of the heart, he had no scruples about using some of the magic arts that in the past required hundreds of years of accumulation of power to use, and he had become extremely reluctant to leave this state, wishing that he could stay in this state forever. How could he not feel unacceptable when he heard that this state was about to pass the tribulation? Do you think I don't know my own willpower? If it weren't for the fact that my willpower was already on the verge of collapse, how could I be unable to control my own power and cause this tribulation? If it weren't for the fact that I had no hope of passing the tribulation, how could I so easily hand over my body to you to control? Do you think that I'm not afraid of death? Or do you really think that your cultivation method is so exquisite that I can disregard the difference in our cultivation? The Venerable One's laughter flowed through Exion's mind. These voices caused Exion to involuntarily feel ashamed and dissatisfied. Naturally, he felt ashamed because he really believed that his cultivation method was so exquisite that he could disregard the difference in their cultivation, just as the voice had said. However, he was dissatisfied because the stone demon knew that he could not pass the tribulation, but still forcefully dragged him down with him, causing him to bear the risk of not being able to pass the tribulation, of dying, and of his soul dispersing. However, this shame and dissatisfaction disappeared without a trace after appearing for a moment, and was replaced by an indescribable sadness. Although he had lived for more than 20,000 years since he was born, in the first 10,000 years, he almost lived in a muddle-headed manner. In the following 10,000 years, he devoted all his attention to cultivation. Therefore, although he had a fairly strong Taoist heart and a fairly firm will, he could not be like the Venerable One, who did not change his mind at all despite everything flowing in front of him. For him, although the stone demon was unreasonable and overbearing, and even trapped him in this dangerous situation where he could die at any time, it had never really hurt him. But after all, she had never truly harmed him. Instead, she seemed to have given him control of her body, allowing him to comprehend many of the mysteries of the heart cultivation technique in the process of controlling his body. In fact, she had even directly allowed him to achieve great success in the heart cultivation technique. Therefore, unconsciously, he regarded the stone demon as a very close person, although it was far inferior to Taoist who, seeing that the stone demon was doomed to die, he could not help but feel a little sad. This sadness was naturally perceived by the Venerable One. However, the Venerable One's mind was extremely firm, almost as immovable as a rock. He did not feel the slightest emotion, nor did he feel close to the stone demon because of his sadness. He controlled the thought and said with a smile, "Well, boy, you did a pretty good job. At least you let me live for 2 or 3 more days. In order to express my gratitude, I will not pursue your sin of triggering my tribulation of becoming a demon." As he spoke, the human-faced fish completely lost his sense of the stone demon's body. The feeling of having an incomparably vast power and an incomparably powerful body completely disappeared in an instant, and the place where he stood became a place of infinite light. His incomparably weak body returned to the senses. Then, an indescribably powerful force enveloped his body, pulling him abruptly and sending him away. He felt the light and shadows around him constantly changing, and in an instant his body had arrived in the outside world. He was now in the air about 10 miles away from the sea. Looking into the distance, there was a mass of dark clouds shrouding a large area of the sea. Under that mass of clouds, an extremely chaotic scene appeared in his eyes. In that chaotic scene, endless, terrifying, and tyrannical power flashed wildly with the power to destroy the world. Waves of destructive aura spread in all directions, constantly spreading across the universe. Even though he was hundreds of thousands of miles away from that location, he could still feel the amazing power of the destructive aura. He felt that his body seemed to be under the strong pressure of the destructive aura. If he had not achieved the advanced level of the cultivation method, and his mind was much stronger than before, he was afraid that he would not even be able to control the power floating in the air and would have been suppressed by the destructive aura and fallen into the sea. Goodbye, Senior. Exion instantly understood when it was. The sadness in his eyes became more intense, and a very deep feeling emerged from it. He bowed to the place where the destructive aura came from and said, Q. Chapter 747. The original human venerable naturally saw all the expressions of the human-faced fish's will. However, for the same reason as before, he didn't care about the will's performance, and he wasn't moved in the slightest. Text first, he still looked at the human-faced fish's will as if he were looking at a stone or an ant, and he didn't feel the slightest bit grateful for its kindness. The body of the stone demon that the human venerable had condensed in the untainted land was now bearing a bombardment that was many times stronger than when the will was still there. It was as if, because the existence of the will had been lost, the untainted land no longer had any scruples, and the power that had been accumulated for 3 days and 3 nights completely poured out in an instant. The human venerable was a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, so it was impossible for him to perfectly control the body of the stone demon, as he had shown before, and he couldn't perfectly use his own power to deal with the endless tribulations. His performance in the endless tribulations was much more relaxed and comfortable than when the human-faced fish's will was at its peak. He just stood in the void, casually, and the power of the heart burst out naturally, forming an invisible barrier that directly swallowed and refined the endless tribulations around him. Not only did the barrier not break because of the horror of the tribulations, but it became stronger in the process. The face, which was 70% to 80% similar to that of the human-faced fish's will, was as cold as a statue, as if it had no emotions at all. The light in its eyes was not as cold as its face, but flashed rapidly, as if it was considering some important choice. After a while, it seemed that it had made a decision, and its whole body shook. In an instant, all the power in the body of the stone demon, including the power of its flesh and the power of the condensed soul, burst out in an instant. The burst of this power was simply earth-shattering. It should be known that the strength of the stone demon itself had reached the level of the golden immortal realm, and after it had been transformed into the heart power by the human-faced fish's will, the power that it could exert was several times stronger than before. Under such circumstances, this power burst out without any scruples. The effect would probably be enough to directly destroy a minor thousand world. On top of that, he had a powerful body that had been tempered by countless tribulations for 3 days and 3 nights. On top of that, he had a spirit that complemented his body in strength. How could it be as simple as 1 + 1? In the blink of an eye, the space where the rock demon was located had completely collapsed. A strange grayish state completely replaced the body of the stone demon. It was as if the void had collapsed and returned to chaos in an instant. The boundless tribulations in the surroundings were instantly devoured by the grayish state. They couldn't cause any damage to the grayish state at all, and they made it grow stronger and more terrifying. The moment this change occurred, the tribulation cloud in the void stopped its continuous bombardment and began to surge rapidly in the void. It's contracting. As it surged and shrank, the tribulation cloud became denser and denser. The power within it became more and more condensed, and the terrifying aura it emitted became more and more astonishing. There seemed to be no limit to the shrinkage. In just a short moment, it had shrunk from a state that covered thousands of miles to a small cluster of dark clouds that was only a few dozen feet in circumference. The cluster of dark clouds floated in the air, looking extremely strange and awkward. It was as if such a strange existence shouldn't have appeared in midair, but should have fallen from the void like a stone. It might even have plunged into the depths of the seabed and the incomparably thick earth. As this change occurred, the tribulation cloud rapidly sank, and in the blink of an eye, it arrived outside the strange grayish state. It directly plunged into the strange state. The moment it plunged in, the strange state seemed to have gone from calm water to boiling. Suddenly, countless droplets splashed in all directions and instantly fused with the void that was still intact, like ink fusing with a large amount of clear water. At first, it could still be seen, but after a short while, it completely disappeared as if it had never appeared. Following that, the strange, grayish state suddenly shrank, becoming smaller and smaller. Soon, it was so small that it could not be seen with the naked eye, and after a blur, it completely disappeared without a trace. As it disappeared, the world returned to normal. It was as if the heavenly tribulation from before and all the strange scenes from before had never happened. In the distance, the human-faced fish Exion saw this, and sorrow welled up in her heart. She bowed again, then gritted her teeth, turned around, and quickly left. Evidently, she thought that this change was because Senior Stone Demon was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the boundless tribulations and had been destroyed at this moment. Of course, the truth was not as the human-faced fish Exion thought. In fact, at that very moment, the human sovereigns had already been sent out by the Spirit Mountain. The power from the great Tianyuan world had directly blasted through the void, creating a void door through its connection with the miniature world and returned to the miniature world. What followed him into the small world was the boundless power of the tribulation cloud. Although the tribulation cloud had shrunk to a radius of a few dozen feet, the power contained within the tribulation cloud had actually reached an earth-shattering realm. Even the human sovereign's main body was many times weaker than the tribulation cloud. Although it might be an exaggeration to say that he was at the level of an ant, he was not much better than an ant. If it were not for this terrifying power, how could the endless tribulation cloud be constantly unleashed, and how could it completely erase the stone demon's body? The human sovereign was already prepared, so he was not surprised by this change. After his will and power returned to the small world, they trembled and returned to his main body, returning to his mind. The power from the great heaven origin world that was released by the Spirit Mountain naturally returned to the Spirit Mountain without any loss. After that, he did not have time to do anything else. His mind fused with the Spirit Mountain below and instantly activated the Spirit Mountain. In the core of the spiritual mountain, the strange wheel that looked like a wheel emitted a light that could pierce through the sky, penetrated the entire spiritual mountain, penetrated the entire small world, and directly wrapped around the tribulation cloud that came with his thought. As soon as the tribulation cloud entered the small world, it was stimulated by the aura of the small world that did not belong to the untainted world. Unleashing all the power it possessed, it destroyed this small world. At this moment, the light emitted by the Spirit Mountain arrived in an instant, completely enveloping the tribulation cloud. With an incomparably powerful force, it gathered around the tribulation cloud, forming a passage that only had one direction. The tribulation cloud could only erupt through this passage. Finally, it connected to the core of the small world, to the unfathomable cave at the bottom of the Spirit Mountain. The power of the tribulation cloud was abnormally terrifying, but it was only a bit of the power condensed by the untainted world. Although it could easily wipe out powerful cultivators, it had its limits. Before it could completely erupt, it was instantly wrapped up by the power of the entire small world and the other large world. How could it break free of this power without wasting any time? As a result, the power that erupted could only be guided by the passageway, continuously flowing into the core of the small world. It flowed into the cave at the foot of the Spirit Mountain and continuously poured in, clashing with the power of the world on the other side. It was enough to destroy the world. The tribulation cloud was originally formed when it sensed the rules, laws, and great Tao of the other world. At this moment, it directly collided with the power of the other world, but it no longer needed the power of the small world to restrict and guide it. It directly moved through the passage at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, it arrived at the core of the world and poured into the passage. The passage was deep and unfathomable. It used an extremely mysterious and complicated method to reach the great Tianyuan world, which was an unknown distance away from the untainted world. The power that built the passage came from the saints of the great Tianyuan world, so one could imagine how stable it was. Even though the tribulation cloud contained a power that could easily kill any cultivator, and after colliding with the power of the great Tianyuan world, it erupted with power that was thousands of times greater than the power it contained, but it still could not shake the passage. After the tribulation cloud entered the cave, countless rumbling noises resounded from time to time, but the cave did not tremble in the slightest. This miniature world and the spiritual mountain that was at the core of this miniature world were not affected at all and had instantly regained its calm. It was as if the tribulation cloud that could destroy the small world had never appeared. When the human venerable used all the power in the body of the stone demon and the power from the great world of Tianyuan to destroy a part of the void in the untainted land and build a passageway that connected to this small world, in a space-time that did not belong to the untainted land, a vast will gradually condense from nothingness, causing the entire space-time to tremble slightly, as if it could not bear the pressure of this will. This space-time was none other than the interior of Luo Fan's great overarching heavenly treasure, the infinite void palace. This vast will obviously did not belong to anyone else. It was Luo Fan. At this moment, since Luo Fan cultivated in seclusion in the infinite void palace, more than 21,000 years had passed in the untainted world. Correspondingly, the time in the infinite void palace was more than 1,020 billion years. In other words, more than 20 billion years ago, he had already comprehended all the mysteries of the great overarching heavenly Tao and directly pushed his cultivation realm to the peak of the great overarching heavenly Tao. There is only an imperceptible gap between the great overarching heavenly Tao and the great overarching metal way. In the next 20 billion years, what Luo Fan did was to constantly comprehend the endless inspiration generated by the countless living beings in the tens of millions of worlds in the infinite void palace while he was cultivating in seclusion. He worked hard to find out what he needed and what would be helpful to his cultivation so that he could break through the imperceptible gap between the great overarching heavenly Tao and the great overarching metal way, so that he could achieve the great overarching metal way. However, it was obviously not an easy task. Although there were tens of millions of worlds in the infinite void palace, there were countless living beings. However, the cultivation realm of these living beings was extremely low. Although there were one or two inspirations that could inspire Luo Fan among billions of people, it was extremely small. If Luo Fan wanted to break through the barrier between the great overarching heavenly Tao and the great overarching metal way, 20 billion years was relatively too short. Therefore, although he had comprehended the boundless inspiration for more than 20 billion years and comprehended most of it, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had only improved by an imperceptible amount compared to when he had just ended his seclusion more than 20 billion years ago, although it was impossible for him to improve again. However, he was still far from breaking through the barrier between the great overarching heavenly Tao and the great overarching metal way. When the human venerable blasted open the void of the primordial world and built a passageway that connected to that small world, Luo Fan suddenly felt his heart tremble slightly. There was a slight disharmony that had not appeared for billions of years. This disharmony was naturally insignificant to ordinary people or even ordinary cultivators. Even if they were primordial unity cultivators, they could not guarantee that everything in their body would be harmonious and natural. They had to conform to certain profound principles at all times. However, the situation was completely different for those who had achieved the grand heavenly Tao. The grand heavenly Tao was the great perfection. Those who achieved the grand heavenly Tao had to reach the great perfection realm in every aspect. This was especially so for existences like Luo Fan, who cultivated the Tao of fruit of Tao. This great perfection was even more absolute. Under such circumstances, cultivators who achieved the grand heavenly Tao would have their body and mind as one. They would have to conform to certain principles at all times. In other words, they would have to maintain harmony and natural stability at all times. Putting aside the fact that Luo Fan was not an ordinary grand heavenly Tao cultivator, he was a supreme existence that could even go against the great overarching metal way. This harmony, this great perfection and natural stability, of course, it was more absolute than ordinary grand heavenly Tao cultivators. It was under such circumstances that his heartbeat suddenly became a little discordant. Having broken away from the rhythm of the profound principles that he had been following, Luo Fan's mind instantly returned from the boundless inspiration. The will that was originally scattered between his mind and consciousness and roaming within the boundless inspiration also naturally condensed. That was why the current situation appeared. At this moment, the power of Luo Fan's divine ability was already close to omniscient, and omnipotent. Therefore, after his mind returned and his will condensed again, it only took a slight thought for him to naturally find the source of his discordant heartbeat from the primordial supreme Tao. I see. An inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face that had not changed for more than 10 million years. As he smiled, the strange platform above the millions of worlds in the Void Wuji Palace seemed to have suddenly turned into an incomparably beautiful paradise. The original loneliness disappeared without a trace in an instant. It was because Luo Fan's cultivation had reached an unimaginable level. Just a change in his expression was enough to cause a change in the void. Luo Fan naturally did not care about this at all. He stood up calmly. During this period of time, there were naturally countless movements that changed his body, but every single one of his movements seemed so profound and unbelievable. If these movements were taken out one by one, every scene seemed to be engraved with a certain aspect of the Supreme Tao. Every single scene was enough for any cultivator to worship as a treasure and spend their entire life comprehending the principles contained within. It was just a simple action, yet it naturally exuded a sense of perfection, freedom, and eternally indestructible. Although he had not moved for more than 10 million years, The vital energy and blood in his body still flowed freely and was full of vitality. His joints did not have the slightest stiffness, and he was completely at his peak state. He was like an athlete who had just done sufficient warm-up and was preparing to go on stage. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no sound coming from his body, and there was no sound of bones cracking all over his body. After standing up, Luo Fan did not hesitate at all. He took a step forward, and his figure instantly disappeared from the Wuji Palace in the void. When he reappeared, he was already in the untainted world, at the place where the human venerable had condensed the body of the stone demon and the power of the great Tianyuan world. In other words, the place where he appeared was the place where the human venerable had used all the power of the stone demon and the power of the great Tianyuan world to open up the passage. At this moment, the passage had naturally disappeared. The human venerable did not open up the passage to form a stable connection between the small world and the untainted world, but to let his thoughts and the tribulation cloud pass through. Since he had achieved his goal, he naturally could not let the passage remain here. However, even though the passageway had disappeared, the traces of the existence of the passageway were as obvious as the dazzling sun to Luo Fan. His eyes shone slightly, and he directly saw through every detail of the construction of the passageway. He saw through the method used to construct the passageway, and even deduced the general outline of the cultivation civilization hidden behind the method used to construct the passageway. So, this is the cultivation method of the great Tianyuan world, but it is not that surprising. Luo Fan looked at the void in front of him, and such a thought appeared in his mind. To be continued. Chapter 748. With the power of Luo Fan at this time, although he had not obtained all kinds of blessings from the supreme great ways in the untainted land, he was also not the slightest bit restricted and could display his power perfectly. Therefore, the disbanded immortal of the great all-embracing heaven needed to use the body of the stone demon and the power from the great Tianyuan world to build the passage. However, with just a slight movement of his mind, the space-time in front of him naturally distorted, forming a space-time passage from the untainted land to that small world. Text first. Although this passage was only condensed by a thought of his, it was unimaginably stable. It even emitted a sense of eternity and immortality. No matter how crazily the surrounding space-time collided and crushed, it did not shake in the slightest. It was as if this passage had always existed between heaven and earth since the creation of the untainted land. Luo Fan took a step and stepped into the passage. In an instant, the passage shrank, and his figure flashed through the layers of space-time and came directly to a strange small world. This, impressively, was the small world that the Venerable relied on. This small world was formed because of the passage connecting the great Tianyuan world to the untainted land. In other words, it was formed because of the power of the great Tianyuan world. It was a small world attached to the great Tianyuan world. The pneuma, the rules, the dharma, and even the incomplete great ways all came from the great Tianyuan world. They were all the same as the rules, the dharma, and even the great ways of the great Tianyuan world. Under such circumstances, if an ordinary cultivator of the untainted land entered this small world, if he could not break through the shackles of this small world, he would inevitably suffer unimaginable oppression. Even if the great ways of this small world were not complete and could not form countless tribulations to kill him like in the untainted land, he would certainly feel uncomfortable all over. He would feel that all his power was being oppressed by the world, and the power of the magic power he could exert would be at least tens of thousands of times lower than normal. However, Luo Fan was not an ordinary cultivator of the untainted land. When he had just achieved the fruit of the way of the great, all-embracing heaven, he had completely cut off all his connections with the untainted land and returned everything he had obtained from the untainted land to the untainted land. At this moment, it was self-sufficient. It was a complete world that didn't need external help. Therefore, to him, this small world, even the great Tianyuan world behind it, was just an existence that was not much different from the untainted land. Thus, to him, since he was able to unleash such a mysterious and inconceivable divine ability at the end of the great desolate stage in this small world. Naturally, the difference wouldn't be too great. That was why he didn't feel any discomfort when he arrived at this place. He just took a deep breath, and a strange smile appeared on his face as if he had confirmed some of his guesses. Then he made a grabbing motion, and the postnatal chi of heaven and earth, which was magically different from the untainted world, quickly gathered in his hand. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a solid ball with a diameter of several feet above his palm. After the sphere was formed, it kept rotating, and it gradually shrank. During this process, there were countless mysterious runes appearing and disappearing on the surface of the sphere. Then, a wisp of innate yuan qi emerged from the center of the ball. After that, the innate origin qi violently engulfed the entire ball. It completely devoured all the postnatal qi of heaven and earth contained in the ball, causing it to grow several times stronger. Then, the wisp of innate yuan qi that was still extremely tiny, even though it had grown several times stronger, curled up and turned into a small bead. There were also countless strange runes on its surface. These strange runes appeared and disappeared rapidly, causing the bead to continuously shrink. The nature of its interior constantly changed. Finally, a wisp of yuan qi with the aura of chaos was produced at its core. It was a wisp of chaotic yuan qi. However, this wisp of chaotic yuan qi was very different from the chaotic yuan qi of the untainted land that Luo Fan was familiar with. It was as if there was a world of difference between the laws it relied on. Even if it was tainted by the aura of chaos, it could not completely eliminate this difference. Luo Fan carefully sensed the wisp of chaotic yuan qi. After a long time, he sighed. I see. The existence that created the great heaven primordial world was at least 10,000 times stronger than Pangu. Otherwise, the first wisp of yuan qi that appeared in the world would not be so stable, and the order would not be so perfect. Even the aura of chaos could not invade its core. Chaotic yuan qi was the first type of yuan qi that appeared after a world was created. This kind of yuan qi was formed when the existence that created the world was tainted with the aura of chaos. Thus, from this yuan qi, one could just barely tell what level the existence that created the world had reached. Of course, only cultivators at Luo Fan's level of cultivation had the right to see this. If one's cultivation level was not high enough, they might not even be able to fully comprehend the chaotic yuan qi, let alone understand what level the creator of the yuan qi was at. After thinking this, he casually waved his hand and dispersed the yuan qi that had gathered. What he was doing was using his supreme power to return the acquired yuan qi to its origin. Through the acquired yuan qi in the small world, he could sense what level the existence that created the great heaven primordial world had reached in order to gain a deeper understanding of the great heaven primordial world. The worlds that Luo Fan had experienced were the untainted land and the earth, which was an unknown distance away. He was so used to these two worlds that he did not feel much about them. Under such circumstances, the appearance of a vast world in front of him naturally piqued his interest. He did not want to let go of anything related to this vast world. He hoped that he could gain something from this process, or perhaps it could allow his cultivation to improve. It was precisely because of this that he was doing what he was doing now. When Luo Fan stepped into this small world, the human venerable, who was at the core of this small world, instantly sensed his arrival. Although the human venerable was only a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, and the gap between him and Luo Fan was huge beyond imagination, this small world was like his body to him. If someone else entered, even if that existence exceeded the limits of his own perception, he would still feel it. Because of this, everything that Luo Fan had done after entering this small world was seen by him. After seeing these actions, the human venerable instantly felt a sense of despair envelop him. How can he be so powerful? How can such a powerful existence appear in a world that has only gone through a few tribulations of heaven and earth? Looking at his appearance, I'm afraid he is only one step away from proving his way and becoming a saint. How is this possible? At this moment, only this thought was circling in the mind of the human venerable like an endless loop. The realm of the great heaven. It was a realm that spanned almost infinitely. As long as one became a zenith heaven and had not become a saint, no matter how powerful one was, even if one was strong enough to fight against a saint, one still belonged to the zenith heaven realm. Therefore, in the endless world of the boundless state of chaos, the existence of a zenith heaven realm could be seen everywhere, crushing another zenith heaven realm like crushing an ant. There were zenith heaven realm cultivators who were strong enough to destroy the world at will. But no matter how powerful the zenith heaven realm cultivators could reach, however, the vast majority of cultivation methods, even the supreme cultivation methods passed down by the sages, would usually only reach a certain level of strength. Then, they would be unable to advance any further and embark on the elusive path of becoming a sage. Just like the strange creature that crossed the infinite space from the Julie great world and entered this untainted land before the end of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Although it had reached the peak of the golden path of the great all-embracing heaven, compared to Luo Fan, it did not have an indescribable advantage. But it was still repelled by Luo Fan. Because of this human venerable was a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. Although in the untainted land, he was a powerful existence second only to Luo Fan, but in the great Tianyuan world, he was only a middle-level existence in the cultivation world. His knowledge was naturally limited. He naturally had a vast and rich knowledge of all kinds of common knowledge in the great Tianyuan world, and he knew almost all the cultivation theories clearly. But he did not have a clear understanding of how the cultivators who were stronger than him were, such as how powerful the existence of the zenith heaven realm could be. Therefore, in his opinion at this time, the existence who could return the chi of another world to its origin like Luo Fan and directly push back the chi of chaos that existed billions of years ago must have reached the peak of the cultivation realm. Only those who had reached the supreme realm below the saint level could do this. Because of this, he had such a horrified feeling at this moment. After this feeling, the human venerable instantly lost all the will to resist and even made a decisive decision, not daring to come into contact with Luo Fan. With a thought, the power of the spirit mountain suddenly erupted, emitting endless, dazzling light, directly illuminating the spirit mountain as if it was transparent. However, this light did not plunge into this small world like before, nor did it attack Luo Fan. Instead, it directly wrapped his body, enveloping his body under the endless light, making him seem to be completely integrated into it. Then, the light suddenly shrank, directly taking him into the incomparably deep cave passage below, which was like a horizontal abyss. But he chose to escape with incomparable decisiveness. As for his mission in the untainted land, the punishment of the Lord, in the face of this crisis of life and death, was already nothing. The moment he entered the passage, the mind of the human venerable flashed wildly, but he no longer thought about why Luo Fan was so powerful and how he could be so powerful. In his current state, thinking about this was already meaningless. What he was thinking about was why Luo Fan would appear and why he would discover the existence of this small world at this moment. After all, he was also a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, and after all, he was also in existence with the title of perfection. His wisdom had also reached an unimaginable level. Therefore, after just a moment of pondering, he had already figured out the reason behind it. He had always been extremely cautious about this mission in the untainted land this time. 11,000 years ago, even if he wanted to obtain a body that could be used in the untainted land, he had to use all kinds of means to lure a wolf shark king, who was barely qualified to come here. He didn't even dare to explore the untainted land with his mind, not to mention interfering with the untainted land. But since 11,000 years ago, after he encountered the will of the human-faced fish, his cautious style began to gradually disappear. In the beginning, it was only a bit of mind that entered the untainted land to exert influence on the cultivation of the mind. He began to become more and more careless, and became more and more reckless. Back then, when he sent a bit of his mind into the untainted land, he was still cautious enough to give up on that bit of mind and directly cut off the connection between the mind and his body. But this time, not only did he casually open a space-time tunnel and send his mind to the surroundings of the mind, he even sent the power of the great Tianyuan world to that location. After accomplishing his goal, he casually opened a space-time tunnel and took back the mind and power. Any one of these omissions was enough for the existence that had definitely raised his cultivation realm to the peak of the realm below the saint to discover the existence of this small world. Moreover, these omissions appear at the same time. How could he not be discovered? Understanding this, the human venerable's mind was filled with endless regret. How could I be so careless? How could he look down on this world? You have to know that no matter how weak this world is, it is still a perfect world. It is also a supreme world that can nurture saints. Damn it, damn it. The human venerable constantly regretted. The figure that poured into the tunnel did not stop at all during this process. Instead, it continued to increase. With a soft, tearing sound, all the light that the spirit mountain emitted flowed into the tunnel. As the light disappeared, the spirit mountain suddenly seemed to have lost all vitality. It no longer looked like a spirit mountain. Instead, it looked like a barren mountain filled with an aura of death and countless corpses. The strange wheel that looked like a wheel at the core of the spirit mountain had already disappeared without a trace. It seemed to have entered the tunnel along with the light. He is so decisive. It seems that he has accumulated a lot of experience by escaping often. Luo Fan seemed to have sensed something at this moment. His eyes shone into the core of this small world. He saw the spirit mountain and the deep and inexplicable passageway. In his eyes, he even saw the entire process of the human venerable's decision to escape and finally escape into the tunnel. He directly saw every movement of the human venerable and even every surge of power. As for the human venerable, he actually did not care too much about it. What he cared about was the tunnel and the great Tianyuan world behind it. Everything about the human venerable was of little use to him. It could not help him improve. Luo Fan did not think it was too important. However, although he did not care too much about the human venerable, it did not mean that he was willing to let the human venerable escape so easily. With a slight thought, his figure leaped through the void and appeared at the entrance of the tunnel. The tunnel was a supreme existence that was built on the level of a sage. The power that it emitted was completely the power of the great Tianyuan world. If it were an ordinary cultivator, the pressure that he felt here would definitely be the strongest in this small world. However, that was not the case for Luo Fan. He did not feel any pressure at all as he stood there. Instead, because of the power here, he gained a deeper understanding of the great Tianyuan world and gained a deeper understanding of it. After he stood still, he casually reached out. His right hand reached into the void and disappeared into nothingness. When his right hand disappeared, a horrified roar came from the tunnel. Then, the horrified roar seemed to be interrupted by something and suddenly stopped. Then Luo Fan retracted his right hand and reappeared. However, in his hand was a young man in a robe that looked like a big-headed gorilla but did not have much hair. The young man's neck was grabbed by Luo Fan's right hand. His body was limp and his head drooped as if all his strength had been sucked away. The young man could not be anyone else. He was the human venerable. There's more? Luo Fan threw the human venerable to the ground and frowned. He reached out with his right hand again and disappeared without a trace. Then, he retracted his right hand and another item appeared in his hand. It was the wheel that looked like a wheel, the core of the spirit mountain. It was an item that came from the great Tianyuan world. After the item fell into Luo Fan's hand, it struggled frantically. There was a faint feeling of fear and anger coming from it. However, the emotion was very vague, as if it was a creature that already had a simple spiritual sense, but only had instincts and did not have a clear consciousness. Seeing this, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. He raised his hand and a force crushed the item. The item suddenly shrunk from its originally huge size to the size of a palm. If it was not solid, it would have been a bracelet. After being crushed like this, the artifact struggling suddenly stopped, and its anger completely disappeared. Only its fear became stronger. A strange light shone faintly in Luo Fan's eyes and shrouded the item. In an instant, all the structure of the item, the rules of the circulation of power, and the origin of the item appeared in his eyes without reservation. He could see it clearly in an instant. Not bad, not bad. Although it does not have a complete spiritual sense, it is also a magic treasure. It has even reached the level of a primordial unity treasure. I didn't expect that magic treasures could be refined in this way. Luo Fan sighed with emotion as he observed. This item did not have a complete spiritual sense. It only had an instinctual spiritual nature. But this did not mean that its power was inferior to the magic treasures of the untainted land. On the contrary, its power was several times stronger than the magic treasures of the same level in the untainted land. The reason why it did not have any spirituality and was not as mysterious as the Dharma treasures of the primordial world was because the method of refining this Dharma treasure and the method of refining Dharma treasures of the primordial world belonged to two completely different cultivation systems. To be continued. Chapter 749. The human sovereign powerlessly lay on the ground, his eyes still filled with disbelief. He raised his head and looked at Luo Fan, who was paying no attention to him and was only paying attention to the artifact in his hand. He suddenly felt that everything in front of him was so illusory, and he wondered if he was dreaming. How is this possible? What happened just now? My original body had already stepped into the passageway and should have been completely isolated from this world. How could this person just casually grab me and bring me back? This was the only thought running through the human sovereign's mind and consciousness. Text first. This passageway was a passageway that connected two worlds that were separated by an unknown amount of space in the state of chaos. Therefore, its nature was mysterious and unpredictable. It was fundamentally different from ordinary tunnels. Although the Rinzun had only rushed into the tunnel before Luo Fan arrived, in that instant, he had already rushed through an unknown amount of space. He was separated from this untainted world and from Luo Fan's current location by an unknown amount of time and space. Regarding this, the Rinzun naturally knew more than anyone else in this untainted world. It was also because of this understanding that he dared to rush into the tunnel without any care. He was not afraid that Luo Fan was only one step behind him to reach the entrance of the tunnel, because he knew that as long as Luo Fan did not rush into the tunnel with him, then the distance between them would be so huge that no matter how hard Luo Fan tried, he would not be able to cross it. However, what happened at this moment had obviously completely changed his mind. He had already completely entered the passageway and had even walked a long distance in the passageway. In a situation where he was separated from the primordial world by tens of thousands of spacetimes, the person in front of him casually reached out his hand and broke through the layers of spacetime to grab him. How could he not feel incredulous? How could he just accept this calmly? At this moment, his body seemed to be unharmed, but in fact, all of his power had been sealed by Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan's grab seemed to be a casual grab, it had naturally triggered countless rules, laws, and even various great ways to build an extremely mysterious seal that contained infinite power in his hand. At this moment, it was this seal that had completely sealed all of the Rinzun's power, including the energy within his body and even his spirit and his will. It was naturally not a problem for him to think, but it was absolutely impossible for him to activate any power to resist. It was because of the existence of this seal that Luo Fan was so relaxed and directly threw him onto the ground. Instead, he observed the magical treasure from the great Tianyuan world. Although the magic treasure was at the same level as the primordial unity treasure in the untainted world, it was only a primordial unity treasure. Compared to Luo Fan's peak of the Daoyuo, Truth Dao, it was simply as weak as an ant. In this case, it was impossible for this magic weapon to have any resistance in front of Luo Fan. It could only let him deal with it at will. Holding the magic treasure, Luo Fan slightly moved his mind. The magic power in his body vibrated, and the magic treasure instantly collapsed, turning into countless strange symbols and countless strange light spots. They gathered in one place and slowly rotated around Luo Fan's right hand, as if a vast and boundless universe had shrunk in his hand. Although the symbols and light spots looked extremely small, as if they were dust particles, as long as one took a closer look, one would find that each of these symbols and light spots had countless details. Each of them seemed to have a world on them, and their mysteriousness had reached an unimaginable level. As the runes and spots of light rotated, the spirituality of the magic treasure that originally existed, which was only instinctive, completely disappeared, as if it had never existed in the first place. Luo Fan's eyes shone brightly, and the light of wisdom flickered faintly in his eyes. After a while, he casually waved his hand, and the symbols and light spots seemed to be pulled by some incredible force. The frequency, trajectory, and even the nature of the rules that they relied on began to change subtly and indescribably. This change instantly made the mysteriousness of these symbols and light spots skyrocket by more than 10,000 times. There was even a faint, inexplicable vitality that gradually spread in all directions. The spirit mountain in front of Luo Fan was infected by this vitality, and the deathly still atmosphere instantly disappeared. What replaced it was a wonderful atmosphere that was even more lively than before it became deathly still. The human venerable below looked at this scene, and his eyes could not help but widen. The incredulity in his mind increased by many times. He can actually improve the magic treasure that my lord refined. How is this possible? My lord is a saint-level existence. How can a person who has not yet become a saint be able to change the magic treasure that he refined? Has this person already become a saint? No, impossible. He doesn't feel like a saint at all. He is definitely not a saint. The human venerable thought, and his gaze toward Luo Fan instantly became shocked and confused. He was thinking too much. Although this magic treasure was refined by his lord, a saint-level existence, that did not mean that this magic treasure had also reached the saint level. Just like the paintings of master painter, not every one of them was a masterpiece that had been handed down from generation to generation. There were bound to be some unsuccessful paintings that were not so valuable. If a saint-level existence seriously refined a magic treasure and completely focused on the magic treasure, then the power of this magic treasure would naturally reach an incredible level. Not to mention a celestial treasure of the great, all-embracing heaven, even a spiritual treasure of the chaos, could be achieved. However, it was obvious that this magic treasure in the hands of Luo Fan, which had been casually broken down by Luo Fan, was not refined in this way by a saint-level existence. After all, this magic treasure was only given to a disbanded celestial of the great, all-embracing heaven, and the saint naturally would not pay too much attention to it. Therefore, the method of refining it was naturally just a casual refinement. Because of this magic treasure was only at the Tai Black treasure level. Compared to the magic treasure of the same level refined by ordinary practitioners, it was naturally much stronger, but it was not to the point where it could not be changed. Therefore, at this moment, Luo Fan just casually rushed the magic power, and the magic treasure was smashed into countless pieces, turning it from a state of complete unity into a combination of countless small units. As for the changes that Luo Fan made to the structure of this magic treasure, in fact, it was not simply to enhance the power of this magic treasure, but to add all kinds of mysteries of his own Tao fruit to it in the way of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth. To be able to enhance the power of this magic treasure, it was only that the original strong potential of this magic treasure was stimulated in this way. The means of saint are really unfathomable. After finishing all this, Luo Fan's face showed a look of admiration. He casually grabbed, and the countless symbols and small dots suddenly condensed in his palm. In the blink of an eye, they condensed into one and became a solid existence. It was a wonderful existence in the shape of a bracelet, which was essentially different from the performance of the previous wheel-like appearance. Apart from the general shape being somewhat similar, it was impossible to see that they were the same object, the same magic treasure. After the bracelet was formed, it slowly floated up, slightly vibrating. A spirituality that was many times stronger than before emerged from it, and even faintly expressed all kinds of complex emotions. It was Luo Fan's own Tao fruit, which contained the characteristics of refining magic treasures in the untainted land. After adding this magic treasure in the way of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth, it naturally affected this magic treasure, so that this magic treasure had some of the characteristics of a magic treasure in the untainted land, and its spirituality was naturally greatly enhanced. However, after all, it was a magic treasure of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth. Although it had some of the characteristics of a magic treasure in the untainted land, it could not directly produce a treasure spirit with spiritual consciousness. It only greatly enhanced its spirituality. The magic treasure jumped and trembled in the void, and inexplicable thoughts of joy came out of it, like a baby who had just been swaddled. The power inside it fluctuated faintly, as if a huge area of the world was shaking, producing a strange sound that was faintly discernible, but revealed a grand and vast meaning. Even the surrounding void trembled slightly. However, although its power seemed to be countless times stronger than before, in fact, its level was still only that of a primordial unity treasure. Although it had reached the peak of primordial unity treasure, compared with before, there was no essential sublimation. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled. He raised his hand, and the bracelet fell into his hand. The thoughts that came out of the bracelet became affectionate and affectionate, as if it was facing its creator. In fact, although this magic treasure was refined by a sage, the sage had only casually refined it and did not give it much spirituality. At this moment, the spirituality that could express complex emotions such as affection, and joy came from Luo Fan. To it, Luo Fan was also its creator. He raised his hand and turned it gently, carefully observing it. Then, Luo Fan turned his head to look at the human venerable and said, "Why did you come to the untainted land from the great Tianyuan heaven and earth?" The human venerable was immersed in a state of disbelief. When he suddenly heard Luo Fan's words, he felt his whole body quiver. It was as if a magnificent world was asking him a question. It was as if this simple sentence contained infinite pressure and an incredible power. If he answered inappropriately, it would directly provoke an intense reaction from this sentence, and he would be directly subjected to unpredictable treatment. He was very familiar with this feeling. Before he came to the untainted land, every time he listened to his lord's instructions, he would feel the same feeling. Realizing this, the despair in the human venerable's heart instantly suppressed all other emotions. How could it be? It really is a sage. This was the only thought in his mind. Seeing the human venerable's appearance, Luo Fan frowned slightly. He casually grasped the air, and this small world naturally condensed a force and directly descended on his body, allowing the human venerable to recover some of his strength. This little bit of strength could not let him exert any power, but could allow him to move freely, unlike before, when he did not even have the strength to raise his head. After obtaining this power, the human venerable was shocked. His eyes slightly brightened, and he suddenly stood up. Finally, he did not have to lie on the ground in embarrassment like before. However, when he raised his head and saw Luo Fan, the muscles on his face trembled, as if he wanted to make an expression, but was directly stopped by an extremely strong will. After a long while, he completely relaxed, and his face even showed a look of relief. He said, "I did not know that a sage is here, and the cultivator of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth, the human venerable, has come abruptly. It is really impolite." The language he used was not the common language of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth that he himself used. Instead, it was the ancient primitive language that was used in the untainted land before the great calamity of heaven and earth that he had learned from the human-faced fish over the years. Although he knew that the person before him would be able to understand any language he used, it was one thing for the person to understand, and another for him to do it. To express his submission, he naturally had to start with the smallest details. Seeing the sudden change in the human venerable's attitude, Luo Fan could not help but laugh as he knew what the human venerable was thinking. The human sovereign before him had clearly mistaken him for a saint-level existence after seeing the power of his magic. Thus, after all sorts of despair, he believed that he would never be able to fight against him, and that it was only natural for him to submit. Thus, he directly expressed his submissive state. In fact, this was indeed the human venerable's mentality. To him, he had come to the untainted land to obey the orders of a sage. Since he had encountered a sage in the untainted land, even if he gave up the mission, his master, the sage who had ordered him to come here, would not be dissatisfied with him. It was precisely because he was clear about this that he had so straightforwardly expressed his submission. "I'm not a sage, but I'm just a cultivator in the untainted land," Luo Fan said with a smile. "Impossible." When the human venerable heard Luo Fan's words, his first reaction was to spit out these words, and the expression of submission on his face became stiff. "If I were a sage, how could the builder of this passageway not have noticed? How could he let you come to the untainted land?" Luo Fan smiled again. The expression on the human venerable's face became even more stiff. This kind of simple fact should have occurred to him immediately, but Luo Fan's strength had already broken through his psychological bottom line, so he immediately threw this simple fact to the back of his mind. Although this human venerable was already a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, in front of Luo Fan, he was like an ant. All of his thoughts, all of his emotions, were like the lines on his palm in Luo Fan's eyes, completely unobstructed and visible at a glance. At this moment, the human venerable's mind was in turmoil, and his thoughts were chaotic, but they were completely seen by Luo Fan. Seeing this, Luo Fan felt that it was quite interesting, and in his heart, he was interested in how this human venerable would react. "I see." After a long time, the human venerable laughed bitterly and said, "Even if you are not a sage, for me, you are not much different from a sage. Well, I want to know, I can calculate and know, so why ask so much?" Luo Fan smiled and said, "Although I have a rough idea, after all, I haven't heard it with my own ears, so naturally I can't be completely sure." The human venerable sighed helplessly, no longer caring about his image. Directly he sat on the ground, spread out his legs, and said, "As I thought, I came to the untainted land to conquer it, to make the untainted land a subsidiary of the great Tianyuan world, or in other words, to become a separate world of my master." As expected, hearing this, Luo Fan let out a sigh. Previously, when he was inside the Wuji Palace of the Void, deducing what had caused his heart to beat erratically, he had already deduced this clearly. Now that he heard the human venerable's words, he was completely sure of his deductions. Of course, the human venerable's words also contained things that he had not deduced, things that he was confused about. Therefore, he asked, how many subsidiary worlds does the great Tianyuan world have, and how does conquering the untainted land help your master? He should be at the sage realm, right? What else does he need from the untainted land? The human venerable laughed bitterly. How many subsidiary worlds does the great Tianyuan world have? How would I know? I have only just entered the grand heavenly realm. However, it is said that each of the 800 sages of Tianyuan has at least one subsidiary world. As for why the sages want the subsidiary worlds for, and what they want from them, how would I know? 800 sages? When Luo Fan heard the human sovereign's words, everything else was thrown to the side. This was the first thing he noticed. His eyes suddenly narrowed as a look of shock appeared on his face. Then, in this shocked expression, an inexplicable excitement gradually emerged. In the legends of the untainted land before his transmigration, there were only 7 great sages in the untainted land. The 3 pure ones, Goddess and Vaiwa, the 2 sages of the west, and a master of heaven and earth, Hongjun. And it was these 7 great sages who had already turned the untainted land upside down, collapsing and reforming countless times. And in the great Tianyuan world, there were no less than 800 sages. Just thinking about how magnificent the great Tianyuan world was enough to make him so excited that he could not control himself. However, in addition to this, what excited him was that he had been lonely in the untainted land for far too long. Even if he wanted to really meet someone who could communicate with him, he couldn't find an existence that could be beneficial to his cultivation. At this time, hearing that there were so many sages in the other world who could see him as an ant, how could he not be excited? After all, the human venerable was also a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, and his observation ability and wisdom were quite amazing. Seeing the change in Luo Fan's expression, he thought for a moment and already knew what kind of mentality Luo Fan had, and why such a complicated expression had appeared before his eyes. He could not help but be stunned, and in his mind, he secretly cursed, to be continued. Chapter 750. After learning that Luo Fan was not a saint-level existence, the human venerable understood that there must be an incredible gap between Luo Fan and a saint-level existence. In front of a saint-level existence, he was just an ant. But even under such circumstances, Luo Fan was so excited when he heard that the enemy had 800 saint-level existences. No matter what the reason was, it was unimaginable to the human venerable. Luo Fan thought for a long time and said, "Tell me everything you know about the great Tianyuan world." These words were almost exactly the same as what the human venerable had said to the human-faced fish, but the target was reversed. Originally, it was the human venerable who said it to the human-faced fish, but now it was Luo Fan who said it to him. This kind of change made the human venerable feel that the world was unpredictable. However, he quickly reacted and sighed, "Why don't you look directly from my memory? Why do I need to say more? I believe that with your abilities, it shouldn't be difficult for you to peek into my memories." When Luo Fan heard this, he smiled faintly and shook his head. "There is no other reason. I just don't dare to." As he spoke, he looked at the human sovereign who was sitting casually on the ground in front of him with a strange expression. There was a faint smile on his face, and his eyes were deep, as if he could see through the endless space and time to see something hidden behind it. When the human venerable heard Luo Fan's words, his face showed surprise. However, he quickly looked at Luo Fan with an extremely shocked expression. "I see. It seems that I am not the first saint that you have encountered. This untainted world has probably been invaded by other forces. If I had known this, I would not have dared to enter this untainted world, even if I risked being punished by the Lord." The human venerable let out a long sigh. Although the human venerable was in despair before, there was still a bit of hope left in the depths of his heart. This hope might be slim, but once it happened, it was extremely likely that he would be able to reverse the situation in an instant. Not only would he be able to escape from his current fate of being at the mercy of others, but it was also extremely likely that he would be able to complete his mission in the primordial world. This hope was none other than what he had said. He wanted Luo Fan to peer into his memories, hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the great Tianyuan world. As long as Luo Fan dared to peek into his memory, he had absolute confidence that he could reverse the situation in an instant. The reason for this was because he had once met his Lord, a saint-level supreme existence. The power of a saint-level being's magical powers had already reached a level that was unimaginable to any living being who had not become a saint. Even a little image or memory left in someone else's memory contained an unimaginable power. If Luo Fan dared to peek into the memory of the human venerable, he would definitely see the memory of the sage. Once he peeked into that memory, he would naturally trigger the sage's thoughts, allowing the sage to instantly sense everything that had happened in the primordial world that he had spent countless years with. When that time came, what awaited Luo Fan would be the wrath of a sage. This was clearly not something that any living being who had not become a saint could withstand. For the human venerable, this was the beginning of a reversal of the situation, and it was also what he relied on to complete his mission. It had to be said that this kind of hope had a high chance of success. Even if Luo Fan did not know what kind of realm the sage's supreme magical powers had reached, he would almost certainly succeed. However, it was obvious that, to the human venerable's disappointment, Luo Fan had encountered a living being from the Julie world countless years ago. He had recklessly peeked into the living being's memory and saw the image of the sage. Everything that had happened after he had peeked into the image of the sage still left a deep impression on him, even after so many years had passed. That feeling of powerlessness, that feeling of insignificance, was something that Luo Fan would never be able to forget. Under such circumstances, how could he make the same mistake again? It was precisely because of this that he said he did not dare to talk to the human venerable as if he was wasting his time. After knowing that Luo Fan would never be fooled, the human venerable finally gave up all hope. Although his memory contained the image of the sage, and even the sage's immortal imprint, it did not mean that he could rely on it to defeat an undefeatable opponent, even if it was like possessing a nuclear bomb that could blow up the entire primordial world into pieces. The sage was a supreme existence. In essence, he had already transcended the world and surpassed all living beings who had not become saints. Even existence at the peak of the zenith heaven's golden path was just an ant to such an existence. Under such circumstances, all other living beings could only passively endure the power of the sage, unless they were also existences at the same level as the sage. However, they could not actively mobilize the power of the sage. Therefore, even though the human venerable knew that the memory in his mind was an existence with boundless power, even though he knew that as long as he activated the potential of the memory, he would definitely be able to turn over a new leaf. However, if Luo Fan did not actively activate the memory, the human venerable could only watch helplessly. He could not use the memory to do anything that could help him escape from his current predicament. Luo Fan looked at the human venerable quietly. He casually played with the bracelet that he had just refined in his hand and waited for Luo Fan to answer his question. The human sovereign had already fallen into complete despair. He knew that he no longer had any chance of resisting in the hands of the person before him. Originally, he wanted to simply not cooperate and allow the person to do whatever he wanted to him, but the desire to live in his heart prevented him from doing so. He could only sigh and begin to explain everything he knew about the great Tianyuan world, not daring to leave out even a single detail. The great Tianyuan world was a vast world that was many times larger than the untainted land. There were all kinds of unimaginable places in it. Even though the human venerable had an extremely outstanding ability to express himself, the words he used were as short as possible. He had even reached the point where he could express himself in one word rather than two. However, it still took him nearly 1,000 years to roughly explain everything about the great Tianyuan world. During the course of his nearly 1,000 years of narration, Luo Fan stood quietly and played with the bracelet-like Tai black treasure in his hand. The expression on his face was indifferent, and he looked extremely calm. However, from time to time, a fiery light of expectation flashed in his eyes. Even the power in his body seemed to become more and more lively because of his narration. The human venerable was in existence at the level of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. Even though his power was sealed to the point where he only had the power to move his body, he could still accomplish many things that were inconceivable to ordinary creatures. Even though he had been talking nonstop for nearly 1,000 years, his voice did not change at all. It was still as loud and clear as it was at the beginning. It was impossible to tell that he had been talking nonstop for 1,000 years. As for his body's exhaustion, it did not appear on his body at all. He was still carefree and relaxed as he sat on the ground. Even the expression on his face had completely calmed down, and there was even a hint of calmness in it. During his 1,000-year narration, it was true that Luo Fan had established a general understanding of the great Tianyuan world. Although he could not really integrate into that part of the world, if he paid attention, he could just about be no different from the ordinary practitioners of the great Tianyuan world. For Luo Fan, this could be said to be a considerable gain, and it played a pivotal role in his next plan. However, compared to the gains of the human venerable, Luo Fan's gains were nothing at all. It could even be said that they were insignificant to the extreme. At this moment, the cultivation realm of the human venerable had unknowingly broken through the shackles of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven and reached the realm of the true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. This breakthrough was so great that it could be calculated in tens of thousands of times. It was almost comparable to all the cultivation achievements that he had achieved in the past hundreds of billions of years. For the human venerable, this kind of unexpected gain was simply unimaginable. It almost made him feel crazy with joy, but it also made him depressed to the point of insanity. Naturally, he was happy that he had actually achieved the breakthrough that he had dreamed of in 1,000 years. The bottleneck that had shackled him for who knew how many billions of years had actually been broken so easily, and the essence of his own life had actually been so easily elevated to such an amazing realm. However, he was depressed that this kind of breakthrough had actually come so slowly. It had actually appeared when he was completely unable to control himself, and his life was completely in the hands of others. What made him even more depressed was that this kind of incredible breakthrough actually did not help his current state at all. He was still in a state where he was at the mercy of others. The person in front of him was still like an abyss, like the sea, like the universe, and just as unpredictable. In this kind of situation, how could he not be depressed? And how could he feel good? The reason why the human venerable had such a huge breakthrough was none other than because, in the past 1,000 years, he had reorganized everything he knew about the great Tianyuan world and used the most concise, most accurate, and most general words that he could do. This kind of approach, of course, was to complete Luo Fan's instructions, but at the same time, it was also to reorganize everything that he had experienced since he was born, all kinds of experiences that he thought he had forgotten, and even all the mysteries that he had once comprehended about the great Tianyuan world in a different way. For the human venerable, who had now become a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven and had been stagnant in this realm, for who knew how many billions of years, this kind of reorganization was simply a retempering of him. Although it did not achieve the same effect as letting him recultivate, it could also deepen his understanding of the way that he had comprehended, purify his cultivation, and purify his cultivation. And this directly broke through the shackles that had originally affected the advancement of his cultivation, which had prevented him from achieving a breakthrough in his cultivation. It allowed all kinds of understanding that he had accumulated over the countless years to be released in a single day, directly promoting his cultivation to be promoted to a higher realm, thus allowing him to break through the shackles of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven and directly become a true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. The mystery of this was extremely mysterious, and before it had happened, even Luo Fan could not have imagined it. It could even be said that being able to achieve this was purely the result of the human venerable's countless years of cultivation in the great Tianyuan world, and it was determined by his own potential. This change, of course, was completely seen by Luo Fan. However, all of this was meaningless to him, and he didn't feel the slightest bit of pressure. The human venerable had broken through the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven to become a true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. This seemed to be the same level as when he was at the peak of the true path of the great all-embracing heaven. It seemed as if the gap between them had been greatly reduced. But in fact, there was no comparison between the peak of the great all-embracing heaven true path and the true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. The disbanded path of the great all-embracing heaven, the true path of the great all-embracing heaven, and the golden path of the great all-embracing heaven were originally different from the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, the true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, and the golden celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. From a certain point of view, the first three realms were already beginning to form their own Tao. They were beginning to gradually break free from the shackles of the heavens and the earth, and they were beginning to stride towards the supreme realm of essence. As for the last three realms, they were still immortals. They were merely attached to the world, to the outside world, and to the great Tao. They were merely immortals who had achieved some sort of perfection and transcended the cycle of life and death. Although they could be called grand heavenly immortals, they still could not transcend and were not much better than primordial immortals or even earthly immortals. The difference between these two realms determined that the gap between them was so huge that it was unimaginable. It could be said that the power of the divine sense of a cultivator at the level of grand heavenly loose path was even comparable to the peak of the true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, or even the golden celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. As for the existence at the level of true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, they were even comparable to the peak of the true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, and were barely qualified to seek the sage. As for the existence at the level of golden path of the great all-embracing heaven, the power of their divine sense was even more unimaginable to a golden celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, and the two could not even be compared on the same level. From this, one could imagine the huge gap between the human venerable and Luo Fan at this time. Although the cultivation realm of the true celestial of the great all-embracing heaven had slightly narrowed the gap between him and Luo Fan, this narrowing was simply a negligible improvement in the face of the huge gap between heaven and earth. How could it change the balance of their strength? Because of this, although Luo Fan saw the breakthrough of the human venerable, he did not care at all. The way he looked at him did not change at all, and he did not give him any new restrictions or seals. It was as if nothing had happened. The human venerable sat there with a very complicated expression on his face, as if he did not know what expression to make. It changed slightly and could not be fixed. So this is the great Tianyuan world. After the human venerable finished speaking, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. It was a sigh, a kind of emotion, but also a kind of expectation. Your Excellency, now that you know the situation of the great Tianyuan world, how are you going to deal with me? The human venerable's expression changed for a long time, and finally, he made up his mind and asked. Luo Fan looked down at the human venerable, smiled, and said, I won't kill you. There is obviously more to this sentence, but this sentence alone made the human venerable feel a lot more relaxed. No matter what kind of fate he would encounter, as long as there was life, there was hope. You were sent by the saint. I have no idea if your life or death will attract the saint's attention or if the saint will make a move. Therefore, I will not touch your life, Luo Fan continued. The human venerable forced his expression to not change at all and quietly waited for Luo Fan to continue. Luo Fan did not hide his thoughts from the human venerable, even if it was because of his fear and worry for himself. After all, at his realm, everything in the world was already in his heart. If he tried to hide it, someone at the same realm would definitely see through him. Therefore, what was the point of hiding it? It was better to just say it. Moreover, Luo Fan's Taoist heart was extremely firm. What he said was what he thought, and what he did was what he said. Even if the other could not see through him, he did not bother to hide it. Because of this, he spoke so confidently and confidently. He spoke of all the considerations that led to his decision, and he did not think that it would damage his dignity to speak of all his fears and worries. However, you came to the untainted world to conquer it, and if it were not for me, you would have a great chance of success. Therefore, it is impossible for me to let you go, Luo Fan said lightly. The human venerable was still expressionless, waiting quietly. Therefore, I will have to trouble you next, Luo Fan said and smiled. He raised his hand and threw the bangle-shaped primordial unity treasure forward. The bangle-shaped primordial unity treasure shook in the air and instantly expanded many times, almost like a ring-shaped galaxy. The endless light spots on the body of the bangle seemed to have turned into countless stars at this moment. All of them seemed to have become incomparably huge. On every single speck of light, there were countless strange symbols faintly appearing and disappearing. An indescribably profound aura spread out during this process and filled the bracelet-shaped, ring-shaped river system. It even seeped out and gradually spread to the entire small world. Then, an indescribable suction force was generated from the bracelet. With a sudden pull, an extremely vast force appeared out of thin air and directly acted on the human venerable realm cultivators below. The human venerable sensed the power acting on his body. He sensed the mysterious connection between the seal that sealed all of his power and this power that could not be described in words. He finally understood what Luo Fan was planning to do. He could not help but show a helpless and relieved expression on his face. The moment this expression appeared, the power had already wrapped around the human venerable and rushed into the incomparably huge bangle. As soon as the human venerable entered the bangle, his body shook violently and suddenly split into hundreds of millions of rays of light. With a sudden fall, they fell into the endless light spots in the bangle and directly merged into them. After the rays of light fell into the bangle, the endless symbols in the light spots began to flicker wildly, and in the process, there was an extremely subtle and inexplicable change. The countless changes gathered together, causing the bangle to gradually produce an aura of the great perfection. It was instantly upgraded by one level and became a Daluo heavenly treasure. Chapter 751. With the change, the countless spots of light that looked like a ring-shaped galaxy trembled and quickly shrank inward. In the blink of an eye, they shrank into a bracelet that looked like it was made of bronze. Text first. On the surface, the bracelet only looked rather simple. The spots of light and symbols that originally existed on it had long been hidden and could no longer be seen. Lying in Luo Fan's hand, it looked extremely ordinary, as if it was really just a bronze ring forged from bronze. However, if it left Luo Fan's hand, the bracelet would naturally be completely different from an ordinary bronze ring. This was because the bracelet had an aura at the perfected realm. This kind of aura at the perfected realm was extremely faint, although it was extremely mysterious. If it lay in Luo Fan's hand, it would be directly covered by Luo Fan's aura at the perfected realm. Therefore, when it lay in Luo Fan's hand, it could not be seen at all. He finally managed to break through. It seems that the sage really did not pay much attention to this magic treasure. When Luo Fan saw this, he could not help but sigh with emotion. At this moment, the human venerable had been completely incorporated into the internal power system of the bracelet. All of his will and thoughts had been scattered to every part of the magic treasure, entering every smallest unit in the magic treasure, providing infinite power to every unit in the magic treasure, so that the essence of the zenith heaven that he possessed could permeate every unit in the magic treasure. In other words, the human venerable's body and will had been directly scattered by Luo Fan, turning him into the power source of this magic treasure that looked like a bracelet, providing everything that the magic treasure needed to increase its power. In this way, because his body and will had been completely scattered, although the human venerable was still alive, he had completely lost all ability to think. He had completely lost all ability to move, could not contact the outside world at all, and could not make corresponding resistance to his own fate. This solved the problem. Luo Fan did not dare to let him go back to the great Tianyuan world, but he could not kill him, nor could he let him cause trouble in the untainted world. As for the magic treasure that looked like a bracelet, it could break through its limit and transform from a primordial unity mystic treasure to a Daluo heavenly treasure. This was an unexpected gain. It would naturally be best if he had it, but even if he didn't, he wouldn't care too much about it. The bracelet vibrated slightly, and an incomparably clear and joyful thought came out from it. In fact, these joyful thoughts could even be vaguely expressed into complete thoughts. It was almost like a Dharma treasure in the primordial world that could communicate with Luo Fan. Luo Fan was not surprised by this. He caressed the magic treasure casually. With a surge of magic power, he activated the magic treasure, causing the magic treasure to suddenly float up from his hand and emit billions of rays of light. Every single one of these millions of specks of light seemed to have substance. Although they were extremely tiny, they were so tough that they seemed to have existed in the world since the beginning of time, as if they were physical objects that could never be destroyed. As soon as they appeared, they directly drilled into the void, even into the gaps of time and space, forming an extremely tight net that covered the entrance of the passageway that connected the primordial world and the great Tianyuan world. Although this passageway was created by the power of a sage, it was mysterious and powerful, but after all, it was just a passageway. As long as it was a passageway, no matter how mysterious it was, no matter how powerful it was, to block it, what was needed was not a power stronger than the passageway. Instead, it only needed a barrier that was large and tough enough. Although the passageway in front of Luo Fan was mysterious and powerful, according to what the human venerable had said, the creatures that could enter the primordial world through this passageway were at most at the level of the true immortal of the great all-embracing heaven. Most of them were existences at the level of the disbanded immortal of the great all-embracing heaven. Only existences at these two levels could achieve a balance between their own endurance and the intense reaction of this passageway, and thus safely pass through this passageway. As long as they surpassed this level, unless they were powerful enough to completely ignore the supreme existence of this passageway, they would certainly not be able to withstand the impact of the intense reaction inside the passageway, because they had passed through it. And to be powerful enough to completely ignore this passageway, one had to be at least at the peak of the golden path of the great all-embracing heaven. Compared to the current Luo Fan, an existence that was at least 10,000, 100,000, or even 1,000,000 times more powerful could do it. And for the current Luo Fan, that kind of powerful existence was absolutely impossible to resist, as long as it was willing. Even if Luo Fan used all of his power on it, it would be absolutely impossible to resist. His own fate had already been decided, so naturally, there was no need to think about it. It was precisely because of these various reasons that this magic treasure in the shape of a bracelet was more than enough to block this passageway and prevent the creatures of the great Tianyuan world from entering the primordial world through this passageway. After the billions of rays of light covered the passageway, like countless tentacles, they directly entangled the space around the passageway. With a sudden contraction, like countless silk threads, the bracelet was pulled to float right in the middle of the entrance of the passageway. Then, the rays of light gradually subsided, and the bracelet also gradually disappeared. After a while, the rays of light and the bracelet seemed to have never appeared, and the entrance of the passageway became dark and deep again. The passageway did not seem to have changed at all, but the effects of the bracelet sealing the entrance had already appeared. This was due to the power that spread out from the passageway. This was the small world that the human venerables could rely on and thus survive in the primordial world for a long time, began to gradually shrink due to the weakening of the source of power. The spirit mountain and cave that were originally hidden in the core of the small world could no longer be hidden and gradually appeared in the middle of the small world. The small world shrank extremely quickly. In a short while, it had already shrunk from its original almost boundless size to a small area with a radius of 100 miles. It was so much so that even if it had shrunk to such a small space, the pressure from the outside world was still constantly pressuring this small space, causing it to tremble. It seemed to be struggling to maintain its stability, but it could collapse at any moment. Luo Fan looked around and sighed slightly. In the end, I can't completely seal it. The power of a saint is indeed unimaginable. The existence of this small world was created with the power of the passageway. Although it was attached to the primordial world, it was completely isolated from the primordial world. It was completely in two different systems and was under the control of two different great Tao. That was exactly why this small world could not arouse the reaction of the supreme great Tao of the primordial world, even though it had so many rules, laws, and great Tao that did not belong to the primordial world. It could maintain its existence for so many years. If Luo Fan used the bracelet to seal the entrance of the passageway tightly enough and could completely seal the passageway, the power of the passageway would naturally be unable to seep out. Naturally, it would be difficult for the small world to have the same characteristics as before. It would directly trigger a violent reaction from the supreme great Tao of the primordial world, causing the consequences of destroying the world. the entire small world would collapse and be destroyed. How could there still be such a small world with a radius of 100 miles? Although he was a little disappointed, Luo Fan was not surprised. If not for the power of the saint, why would he let the human venerable live? Why would he spend 1,000 years listening to the human venerable's nonsense? With just a thought, he could instantly understand everything that the human venerable had said in the past 1,000 years. At that moment, the bracelet that had become a Zenith Heaven treasure could not completely seal the passageway that the saint had opened. However, it was extremely natural. After sighing with emotion, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. A large thought separated from his mind and slowly condensed in front of him. In a short while, it condensed into a human-shaped shadow. The human-shaped shadow was faintly discernible, but there was still a perfected aura coming from it. Looking at its appearance, it was completely Luo Fan's appearance. After the shadow was formed, he looked down and smiled. Without saying a word, he turned around and entered the passageway. When he passed by the entrance of the passageway, there seemed to be a huge network formed by countless rays of light that flashed and disappeared. Then, he completely disappeared into the passageway. After the shadow disappeared, Luo Fan smiled slightly. He did not leave and sat down cross-legged at the entrance of the passageway. His mind and will were connected to the Wuji Palace of the Void, and his speed instantly accelerated by tens of millions of times. He began to continue what he had done before entering the primordial world this time. He continued to comprehend the inspiration generated by the countless living beings in the nearly millions of worlds to seek nutrients for his advancement. His body seemed to have turned into a stone statue. There was no aura at all, and no thoughts flashed. At this moment, it was no longer important to him where he was. He wanted to have a longer time than the primordial world. However, he no longer needed to put his body into the Wuji Palace of the Void. He only needed to connect his mind and will with the Wuji Palace of the Void. Of course, in this way, it was only his will and his feelings that obtained a longer time. His body still did not gain a single bit of time. If he wanted to rely on a longer period of time to accumulate power, his method would be completely useless. Moreover, only those who had achieved the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit and achieved the Zenith Heaven Scattered Tao or above could do so. If an ordinary living being, even if he was at the pinnacle of the primordial unity gold element, if he dared to do so, the connection between his mind and his body would be cut off in an instant, and his body would perish along with it. If he was unlucky, his body could cultivate into a demon and regenerate a spiritual consciousness, becoming another existence. After all, if one did not become a Zenith Heaven, they would not be perfected. There would be a gap in the connection between the mind and the body, and they could be separated by different space-time. Only after becoming a Zenith Heaven, when the body and mind were perfected, even the barriers of different space-time could not be cut off. Only then could they use the method that Luo Fan was using to obtain a longer time. The thing that Luo Fan condensed from a wisp of will was none other than his clone. Moreover, it was more important than a clone projection, as it had a closer connection with him and was more substantial. Seriously speaking, this clone had a closer connection with him than the clone he sent into the Earth's universe, and it also had more substance to him. Of course, at this moment, the clone that had just been condensed was naturally far from being able to cultivate into another Luo Fan like the body that was far away in the Earth universe. However, it could be expected that if this clone wanted to cultivate to that level, it would be much easier than the clone in the Earth universe, and the possibility of it succeeding would be much greater. Luo Fan was endlessly interested in the great Tianyuan world, and even felt that it was a place that he had to pass to achieve a breakthrough and attain the origin Tao fruit. However, that did not mean that he would go there in person. In any case, there were 800 sages in the great Tianyuan world. Each of these 800 sages could crush him like an ant. No matter how confident Luo Fan was, he would not be able to do so, no matter how much fighting spirit and excitement he had. He did not think that he would definitely obtain a breakthrough opportunity in the great Tianyuan world, nor would he easily understand the method to attain the origin Tao fruit. However, If he went there personally and things went wrong, the fate that awaited him would be unimaginably tragic. Without absolute confidence, how could he take the risk? Therefore, it was best for him to send his clone there. It was also the only choice he had. Condensing a doppelganger was not a difficult task for Luo Fan. It could even be said that he had countless experiences and knew how to increase the connection between the doppelganger and himself to the greatest extent. He also knew how to strengthen the strength of the doppelganger, so that the doppelganger would not be truly independent and would have the possibility of cultivating into another self. The degree of propriety involved was naturally subtle and unpredictable. It was extremely difficult to grasp. However, Luo Fan had gone through numerous experiences in the past. After countless studies, he had long been able to reach a perfect state. Just like how he seemed to have casually split a thought and casually pinched it, that thought became a clone. But in fact, each of the changes contained endless mysteries. If they were unfolded, any cultivator might not be able to fully understand the mysteries even after hundreds of millions of years. Even if the person who comprehended these mysteries was also an existence of the Zenith Heaven True Tao, it would not shorten the period of comprehension too much. Because of this, the clone that Luo Fan had condensed had an extremely close connection with his main body. It also had an extremely powerful aptitude, and the possibility of cultivating into another self was extremely high. The possibility of it becoming independent and betraying itself was almost non-existent. After this clone was formed, it naturally learned everything from Luo Fan and understood what it had to do. Therefore, there was no need for Luo Fan to instruct it. Without saying anything, it directly rushed towards the passage. The bangle-shaped Daluo heavenly treasure that sealed the entrance of the passage naturally would not stop Luo Fan, who was refining it. Thus, he only gave way a little before giving up the entrance. It allowed the clone to rush into the passage without any hindrance. The passage seemed extremely dark and deep from the outside. However, after entering, one would realize that it was not pitch black at all. Instead, it was colorful and showed endless light and shadows. These lights and shadows were unpredictable, and each of them seemed to correspond to some kind of substance, some kind of scene, and some kind of event. However, it was unknown how many times they had been transformed, to the point where even Luo Fan was unable to distinguish what exactly they were showing. This clone was still Luo Fan, and it had everything that Luo Fan had. Although it was just a shadow condensed from a thought, and only had a perfected Daluo aura without any other power, its essence was still there. Its vision, knowledge, and endurance were all extremely strong. However, as soon as he entered the passage, he knew many things that he would not have thought of outside the passage. The passage was not a void, but multiple space-times. It was these space-times that used various unimaginable methods to split the state of chaos and connect the chaos and heaven's origin. This space-time was not a void. Instead, it contained boundless power and boundless light. The reason why it appeared pitch black to the outside world was because the passage was mysterious and unpredictable. Any light could only be limited within the passage and could not penetrate outside. The passageway was not calm. Although Luo Fan's clone had completely eliminated all of its power, leaving only a bit of the essence of a golden immortal, it still caused the power in the passageway to surge. It still endured the impact of power that was 10 times stronger than the pressure that existed in ordinary passageways. This kind of impact was extremely powerful. As long as a cultivator had not become a Daluo, he would certainly not be able to withstand it. He would be turned into powder in the first wave of impact, directly engulfed by the power. However, although Luo Fan's clone did not have the slightest power, its body was extremely refined and pure. It was perfect, sturdy, and stable. Its endurance was still many times stronger than that of an ordinary Daluo existence. This was an impact that even a disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven could withstand. For him, it was naturally nothing. However, it constantly collided with his body and instead tempered him, allowing his essence to slowly improve bit by bit. The spacetimes in the passage were extremely different from the spacetimes in the outside world. These spacetimes seemed to have no thickness. They were stacked layer by layer in the passage. Every inch of distance that Luo Fan's clone felt as if it had crossed tens of thousands of spacetimes and passed through tens of thousands of spacetime barriers. In such a spacetime, it naturally completely lost the concept of distance in the outside world. For a passage, distance had no meaning at all. The passage in front of him seemed to be incomparably long, without any end. But perhaps in the next moment, he could reach the end and pass through this passage. Therefore, for Luo Fan, the time he could prepare would not be too long, but he had to do it as soon as possible. The passageway was extremely profound. Even though he did not give this clone any power and did his best to minimize the ripples this clone caused in the passageway, it still caused the energy in the passageway to react, causing the passageway to become unstable. If this change continued until the end of the passage, the possibility of being discovered would greatly increase. In addition, the essence that his clone possessed at this time was incompatible with the Great Tianyuan world. If he entered the Great Tianyuan world like this, it would be like a firefly flying into a pitch-black room. He had to deal with these problems before he passed through this passage. Otherwise, if he entered the Great Tianyuan world, he would just be delivering food to the table, and there would be nothing else to talk about. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me at Chidian. Your support is my greatest motivation. More information. Address. Chapter 752. As Luo Fan's clone moved through the passageway, he constantly guided the boundless energy contained in the passageway, allowing the energy to seep into his body. Like clear water, he constantly cleansed his clone. TXT ebook download ***. This clone originally only possessed the purest source of life that belonged to Luo Fan, as well as the essence of the great perfection of the Zenith Heaven realm. Although this structure was extremely pure, Luo Fan was born and grew in the primordial world after all. Even if he had completely cut off all connections between himself and the primordial world, it could not change the fact that his source of life possessed some mysterious characteristics that only living beings in the primordial world possessed. This mysterious characteristic was something that every living being born in the world possessed. The Earth universe, the primordial world, the Great Julie world, the Great Tianyuan world, and the countless other perfect worlds between the chaotic states of the universe possessed these characteristics. This mysterious characteristic came from the existence that created this perfect world. To the primordial world, it was from Pangu. Clearly, there was a huge difference between the primordial world and the Great Tianyuan world. Pangu and the existence that created the Great Tianyuan world were not the same. As a result, this mysterious characteristic did not affect Luo Fan at all. Even though he was already such a pure clone, he was still incompatible with the Great Tianyuan world. If this incompatibility happened in a primordial world, it would naturally not have much of an impact. However, it happened in a world with 800 saints. It was basically shouting to the 800 saints that he had already arrived. As a result, if he wanted this difference to disappear and his clone to perfectly merge with the Great Tianyuan world, the most important thing to change was the mysterious characteristic contained in his source of life. This characteristic was so mysterious that it was impossible to find any tangible or intangible existence in his mind to correspond with it. Even the current Luo Fan could not completely grasp the source of its existence. As a result, all he could do was use the boundless energy that belonged to the great heaven origin world to cleanse his will and his clone. He allowed the various mysterious existences that came from the great heaven origin world to assimilate his clone, hoping to change the mysterious essence of the clone so that it would no longer be any different from the living beings of the great heaven origin world. This process was obviously not something that could be completed in a short period of time. According to Luo Fan's shallow understanding of the mysterious essence, if he wanted to achieve his goal, he feared that it would be impossible to do so without tens of thousands of years of time. But that was nothing. After all, the concept of time no longer existed in the passage. To him, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, a moment, or a split second did not make much of a difference. Moreover, according to the time that the human Venerable One felt when he passed through the passage, he seemed to have experienced hundreds of thousands of years before he passed through the passage. Although this was only his intuition, the feeling that Luo Fan and the human Venerable One had when they both passed through the passage should not be too different. As a result, he should still have hundreds of thousands of years to guide the energy to assimilate into his body, allowing the mysterious essence of the clone to undergo a crucial change. Apart from changing the mysterious characteristic that could easily be sensed by saints, Luo Fan had to solve another problem during this period of time. It was the problem of the ripples of energy caused by his clone in the passage. The ripples of energy were caused by the entry of existences from the outside world. No matter what form the existence from the outside world took, whether it was matter, energy, mental strength, will, or any other invisible existence, as long as it was not born in the passage, it would definitely cause the passage to react, thus triggering the ripples of endless power. Under such circumstances, the difficulty of solving this problem for Luo Fan was not the slightest bit easier than changing the mysterious characteristic of his existence. Moreover, its importance was not any less than changing the mysterious characteristic of his own existence. After all, if he could not solve this problem, even if he changed the mysterious characteristic of his body and completely integrated it into the great Tianyuan world, it would not help. He would still be sensed by the saint as soon as he entered, and he would still be sent to the table. However, Luo Fan had absolute confidence. If he still could not solve this problem after hundreds of thousands of years, then he would have wasted his time cultivating for such a long time. Although this passage was only a passage that originated from the great Tianyuan world and passed through the boundless state of chaos into the primordial world, in reality, because it had to exist in the state of chaos, it was actually a combination of countless space-time and countless worlds. In other words, it was an extremely mysterious world that was completely different from the stable world of the primordial world. Luo Fan's doppelganger had to assimilate its own mysterious characteristics with the great Tianyuan world, converging all of its existence so that it wouldn't arouse the energy reaction of this passage. This was equivalent to converging its own existence in this mysterious world through cultivation, assimilating its own mysterious characteristics with this world. Looking at it from another perspective, it became a lot simpler. With Luo Fan's ability, it didn't seem too difficult for him to do this in hundreds of thousands of years. Luo Fan constantly let the energy contained in the passageway permeate his body. He worked hard to study the characteristics of that energy and comprehend the mysteries of that energy. With this kind of comprehension, he continued to delve deeper into the source and finally comprehended the laws hidden behind this energy and even the vast and ethereal Great Tao. Although this was only his clone, it had all of Luo Fan's memories, all of his wisdom, and even his extraordinary aptitude. As a result, his research and comprehension quickly entered his body. Mysterious dermic arts and divine abilities with supreme power were gradually created by him. These magic arts and magical powers could all be found in the various magic arts and magical powers that he originally possessed. However, they were completely based on the energy inside the passage, or rather, the energy of the great Tianyuan world as the foundation. This change caused the assimilation speed of the mysterious trait that he possessed to continuously accelerate. This was natural. The cultivation of a cultivator was originally a process of constantly absorbing nutrients from the outside world to sublimate oneself, continuously improving the essence of one's existence, and continuously advancing. Luo Fan's clone was able to draw support from the energy, laws, and great Taos contained within this passage to create various divine abilities and secret arts. This naturally meant that he had a deeper understanding of the origin of this passage. This would naturally make his relationship with the passageway even more intimate, and it would naturally speed up the assimilation process. However, although magic arts and magic arts were created, it was only a process. If he wanted to truly solve those two problems, it was impossible to rely on constantly creating magic arts. What he needed was to cultivate some magic arts that could allow him to possess the mysterious characteristic of the primordial world to change faster, allowing him to completely conceal all traces of his existence. This was many times more difficult than creating some of the magic arts that he had already mastered. However, it was not something that could be created easily. In Luo Fan's doppelganger's senses, time passed by suddenly fast and suddenly slowed down. In a daze, 100,000 years had passed. In the past 100,000 years, he would occasionally establish some contact with his main body and transmit his various comprehensions to it. At the same time, he would also obtain some hints from his main body. Although the clone and the main body had the same intelligence, the same self, and the same memories, ever since the clone entered the passage and the main body stayed in the primordial world, what they saw and heard naturally became different. Naturally, what they thought and obtained were also different. This was the foundation of their exchange. It was also the reason why Luo Fan had condensed such a clone and sent it out of the primordial world to the Tianyuan Great World. In the passage, he felt that 100,000 years had passed. However, in reality, after connecting with the main body of the primordial world, he realized that the time in the primordial world seemed to have become very long. Sometimes, when he connected with his main body, he would realize that he was at a certain moment. The next time he connected, he would actually be at a certain time in the past. The next time he connected, it would be in the distant future. There were all sorts of strange things, making it impossible for him to know how much time had passed in the primordial world during the 100,000 years he had been in the passage box. This feeling was extremely similar to a dream. It was more like being in the deepest state of meditation, and more like being in a completely idealistic world. It was also because of this kind of Huanluan that the clone and Luo Fan's main body gain a lot. After all, if his avatar had this feeling, his main body would naturally not feel any different. He also felt that time seemed to have become Huanluan. At this time, it was still a message from his avatar at a certain moment. After a certain amount of time had passed, he actually received the message from his avatar in the past, and in the next moment, he even received a message from his avatar in the distant future. This kind of Huanluan was like the countless past and future Luo Fan and his clone were discussing and studying together. Naturally, the benefits they gained from each other were huge. One day, when the avatar felt like 100,000 years had passed, some news suddenly came from the main body. There were two unimaginably complicated books. Just the words that recorded the cultivation methods contained hundreds of billions of cultivation methods that came from the main body. As soon as Luo Fan's doppelganger got his hands on the two cultivation methods, his mind moved, and he instantly comprehended the two cultivation methods. He knew that these two cultivation methods were the cultivation methods that he had been trying to find for the past 100,000 years. The first would allow him to directly use the endless energy in the surroundings to form a body. His body would have its own rules, laws, and even great Tao. It would be like a space-time created by the passageway, completely fusing with the passageway. In this way, it would be like becoming a part of the passageway and would no longer cause any reaction from the energy inside the passageway. Moreover, cultivating this cultivation technique could also allow him to obtain power that was compatible with the nature of his will. In other words, this clone could directly become a zenith heaven. Although this kind of foundation was a little unstable, and it was not the cultivation of the fruit of the way, he still needed to strengthen his foundation in the future to learn how to change his cultivation technique. However, it was still enough for him to have a considerable ability to protect himself in the great Tianyuan world. Apart from that, there was another cultivation method, which was a pure mental cultivation method. It was purely using the endless energy around him to completely refine his own will and his own life source, causing the mysterious characteristics of the primordial world to completely disappear. The mysterious characteristics of the great Tianyuan world that the energy inside the passage contained within the energy of the great Tianyuan world that belonged to the great Tianyuan world to replace it. To achieve the miraculous effects of these two cultivation methods was naturally extremely difficult. Even though it was only a few words here, it was only a matter of a few sentences. Although it was just a few words, the specific method to achieve the results could only be barely and concisely pointed out, even if there were hundreds of billions of words. However, Luo fans still needed to expend endless energy to comprehend and cultivate for a long time before he could truly achieve it. After receiving these two cultivation methods, Luo fan's doppelganger also knew where these two cultivation methods came from. These two cultivation techniques were not comprehended by the main body, but by the clone himself. The reason why they came from a main body was because the main body had received a communication from him more than 300,000 years in the future and obtained these two cultivation techniques. It seems that I have to remember to contact the main body at that time and pass this technique to him. An inexplicable expression appeared on Luo fan's clone's face. He smiled faintly, as if he found it ridiculous, but also as if it was only natural. At that moment, he felt like he had never felt before that the boundary between the past and the future had been broken by Han. Time seemed to have truly become a three-dimensional existence of the same kind as length, width, and height. In a daze, he felt that his understanding of the mysteries of space-time had deepened. However, I only learned about these two techniques from the main body, and the main body only learned about these two techniques from the future me. In that case, how exactly did these two techniques come about? They must have a source. They can't be born out of thin air, right? Suddenly, another question appeared in the mind of Luo fan's clone. The same question also appeared in the mind of Luo fan's main body after he passed the two techniques to the clone. Although one was the main body and the other was the clone, they had the same self, the same intelligence, and the same ideas. Since they had encountered the same changes, the thoughts they had were not too different. The same question did not torment Luo fan's main body and clone for too long. In the end, they came to the same conclusion. That was, the source of these two cultivation techniques was still the clone. The clone must have cultivated the two cultivation techniques to the peak and completely understood all the mysteries within them. He even engraved them into the source of his life, allowing them to transcend space-time and permeate the past and the future. Only then could the two cultivation techniques transcend the past and the future, appearing as if they had appeared from nowhere. Luo fan had never thought of such a situation before, nor had he researched the principles behind it. However, after thinking about it, and even going through all the mysteries of the Daluo true way that he had completely comprehended, he could only think of this possibility. After thinking through all of this, both Luo fan's main body and clone discovered that a huge door had opened up in front of them. A brand new cultivation technique had appeared in front of them, and the tip of the iceberg had appeared. The world that they saw and felt seemed to have completely changed at this moment. However, perhaps I've used a trick this time. Perhaps I haven't really reached the stage where these two cultivation techniques transcend space-time and permeate the past and the future. I should only be close to it. It's only because I'm in this passageway that I'm in a completely different world from my main body that I've reached that stage. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be so unfamiliar with these two cultivation techniques. Almost at the same time, the clone and main body had the same thought. This feeling made Luo fan feel an indescribable sadness and even a faint sense of despair. Could it be that I'll never be able to cultivate any of the cultivation techniques to that stage? He allowed a long sigh. However, this was just a thought. Right now, he was only guessing what the truth was. He still did not know whether there was such a stage and what the final manifestation of that stage would be. He could only put it aside and wait for his future cultivation to verify it. These two cultivation techniques were rather limited and were not very meaningful to Luo fan's main body. Thus, after Luo fan's main body thought it through, he put it aside and continued to meditate and comprehend the boundless inspiration he had obtained from the infinite Void Palace. On the other hand, his clone made the best use of his time to comprehend the two cultivation methods and study the mysteries hidden behind them. After all, These two cultivation techniques came from him, so the way they were worded was naturally very compatible with him. As the comprehension progressed, he gradually entered a supreme cultivation state where there was no one and no me. The mysteries of the two cultivation techniques were gradually understood by him. He also began to cultivate these two cultivation techniques. For a time, the boundless energy within the passageway started to become strange. The way it surged was no longer like before, where it was only guided and pushed away by foreign objects. Instead, it was like a headless fly. At one moment, it seemed like it had discovered the existence of an astonishingly huge foreign object, and at the next moment, it seemed like nothing had entered it. It was unpredictable, and there was no pattern at all. Chapter 753. During the cultivation process of Luo Fan's clone, he felt that time had passed by slowly. The mysteriousness of the passageway completely separated the space-time changes in the passageway from his perception of time. Although he felt that a long time had passed, the passageway did not seem any different from when he first entered it. First text. It was as if his body had not moved at all. It was as if the feeling of him breaking through layers of space-time and advancing an extremely long distance during that long period of time had become an illusion. In a trance, in Luo Fan's clone's perception, 360,000 years had passed. On this day, the endless energy around Luo Fan's clone suddenly paused and suddenly dissipated without a sound. Even the energy waves, which were 10 times stronger than when nothing had passed through the passageway, had disappeared without a trace. It was as if nothing from the outside world existed in the passageway. As the energy subsided, Luo Fan's clone, who had been wrapped in energy for 360,000 years, was revealed. It was a strange body. The head of this body was a size larger than that of an innate Taoism body. Its arms were several times longer than that of an innate Taoism body, and its body was slightly smaller than that of an innate Taoism body. When all these changes were combined together, the body seemed to have turned into a big-headed gorilla. It was similar to the human sovereign. Although his appearance still belonged to Luo Fan, he could already be seen as a creature of the great heaven origin world. This body was naturally the body that Luo Fan had formed after cultivating the two cultivation methods. Not only did this body look completely different from his original body on the surface, but it was also completely different from his original body on the inside. Luo Fan sensed his body slightly, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. Although this body was intrinsically different from the innate Taoism physique, it was also perfect and flawless. It also contained some kind of inconceivable profundity and conformed to some kind of supreme principle. It was no weaker than the innate Taoism physique when it came to cultivation. In fact, it was even better in some aspects. This should be the body form of the existence that created the great Tianyuan world. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. This body was naturally formed after he completely replaced the mysterious characteristics that he had brought from the primordial world with the mysterious characteristics of the Tianyuan world. It was a form that was suitable for cultivation. The determination of this form was similar to how Luo Fan had determined that the innate Taoism body was suitable for cultivation in the primordial world. It was the cultivation body of the great Tianyuan world, or rather, the innate Taoism body of the great Tianyuan world. The appearance of a body suitable for cultivation was naturally decided by the creator of the world. The reason why the primordial world had the appearance of the innate Taoism body suitable for cultivation was because Pangu, who had created the primordial world, had the appearance of the innate Taoism body. From this, it could be deduced that the appearance of Luo Fan's clone in the great Tianyuan world was suitable for cultivation because the existence that created the world had such an appearance. However, at Luo Fan's current realm, the appearance of his body could no longer shackle his heart. Not to mention that the proportions of his body had become different from the past. Even if his entire body was flipped over and turned into the appearance of an ant, as long as it was still suitable for cultivation, Luo Fan would not care in the slightest. He would not feel that there was anything wrong with this. He would not care about the brightness and twists of the future road, and maintain the appearance of his familiar body. Therefore, after lamenting about the origin of this body, he put it aside. With that thought, he realized that the two cultivation techniques in his body had an inexplicable connection with the past and the future. However, it was extremely blurry, and he could not break through the restrictions of the past and the future. He knew that he was still a step away from letting these two cultivation techniques truly break through time and space and transcend the past and the future. He could only sigh to himself. However, this sigh did not make him too depressed. After all, he had completed his initial goal. At this moment, not only his will, but the essence of his soul had also completely assimilated with the great Tianyuan world. In the future, when he entered the great Tianyuan world, it would be like a drop of water entering the ocean. He would no longer be out of place. As long as he was careful, it would not be easy for the saints to discover that he was a guest from another world. As for this body, it was extremely mysterious. Not only did it possess the characteristics that were suitable for cultivation in the great Tianyuan world, it also contained the endless laws, and even the elusive great Tao within the tunnel. It was completely self-contained, like a small, independent world. It constantly blended with all the laws, and great Tao in the surrounding tunnel. Its movements were like the natural flow of the laws, and great Tao. There was not a single trace of disharmony. It was precisely because of this characteristic that even though this body was countless times stronger than the avatar condensed from his 360,000 years ago, it did not cause any reaction from the energy in the passageway. Instead, it was like a void without substance, and no matter how the boundless energy surged through it, it would naturally not cause any special energy fluctuations. Aside from that, he had completely comprehended the essence of the two cultivation techniques that he had found to be extremely complicated and profound 360,000 years ago. In fact, he had even completely engraved those two cultivation techniques into his own life essence. This achievement was quite shocking, and it had even reached an inconceivable level. If he had to describe it, it would be that if he completely erased all of his memories regarding the two cultivation techniques, even if he completely erased all of his memories related to the two cultivation techniques, he would still be able to recreate the two cultivation techniques with a single thought. In fact, the cultivation techniques that he created might even be more profound and simplified. At this level, Luo Fan no longer had any doubts regarding the two cultivation techniques. With a thought, he knew that this was the time to pass the two cultivation techniques to his main body, so that his past could borrow the two cultivation techniques to cultivate them. As a result, an extremely mysterious connection that even transcended space-time was established between his clone and his main body. After a little inquiry, he knew that he was connected to his main body before he had obtained the two cultivation techniques. Without any hesitation, he directly passed the two cultivation techniques over. Luo Fan's main body was naturally inexplicably surprised, but his Taoist heart was, after all, so firm that it was almost eternally unmoving. Therefore, he did not have much reaction, nor did he have much communication with his clone at this time. After obtaining the two cultivation techniques, he directly cut off the connection between them. After the connection between his main body and his clone was completely cut off, Luo Fan's clone finally felt a sense of relief. Although he had obtained these two cultivation techniques in the past, he would definitely pass them back before he left this passage. But after all, this was a strange process of reversing the cause and effect. Even if his Taoist heart was firm and his soul was complete, before he could completely make up for this cause and effect, he would still be under a lot of pressure. Therefore, at this time, when he had finally made up for this cause and effect, he seemed to be a lot more relaxed. After relaxing for a while, he stirred the power that was born in his body. It was completely different from the power he had in the past, but had already reached the peak of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. The speed of his body moving forward increased dramatically. Because his body and power had been completely integrated with the countless strange space-time inside this passage, He indeed seemed to be many times more relaxed in this passage than in the past. The layers of space-time that originally required a lot of effort to break through seemed to not exist at this moment, allowing him to pass through at will without the slightest resistance. Therefore, in this passage, for the first time, he felt that he was moving forward. He felt that the distance to the other exit of the passage was shortening. More than 400,000 years of time was really not wasted. The mind of Luo Fan's clone couldn't help but have such a thought. But it was just a thought. After that, he put more effort into comprehending the two cultivation techniques. He worked hard to absorb the energy from the outside world, refining his body, his spirit, and his mind. He worked hard to improve the purity of his body, spirit, and mind, and worked hard to deepen their integration with the energy of the outside world. At this time, although he had the initial qualification to integrate into the great Tianyuan world, it was only the initial stage. If he really wanted to make a difference, it was necessary to improve his own strength and cultivation. Because he had already solved the two basic problems, the Avatar no longer needed any help from the main body in the primordial world. He did not have anything to pass to the main body. Therefore, during the process of passing through the passageway, he did not contact the main body again. This period of time was not too long, or rather, it was not too long compared to the previous 400,000 years. Based on what he sensed, about 800 years later, somewhere in his line of sight, there was suddenly an incomparably dark, like a bottomless abyss, leading to an unfathomable strange cave. This cave looked extremely similar to the entrance of the passage that he had seen in the small world of the untainted land, and it even felt exactly the same. At this moment, Luo Fan instantly understood that he had reached the other entrance of the passage. Behind this is the great Tianyuan world. Luo Fan stopped moving. A kind of excitement, anticipation, and anxiety filled his mind, making it almost impossible for him to maintain a calm expression. Of course, after all, he was in existence with a perfect mind and Taoist heart. After a short while, he completely stabilized his emotions. With a slight thought, his figure gradually disappeared, gradually fading into nothingness. Only endless energy flowed and surged like flowing water where his body originally was. All traces of his existence disappeared completely in an instant. This method was none other than a kind of concealment method that he had derived from the two cultivation methods. Although the two cultivation methods are divided into two parts, their essence was the same. They both comprehended the essence of the great Tianyuan world, and they both integrated into the power of the great Tianyuan world. This method naturally had a concealment method that completely integrated into the energy of the great Tianyuan world. As for how powerful this concealment method was, and whether it could hide from saint-level existences, Luo Fan naturally could not be certain. After all, he could not imagine what kind of incredible magic a saint-level existence possessed. However, this kind of concealment technique had already reached the limit of what he could do. Everything that he could conceal had already been completely concealed. Everything that he could fuse with the surrounding energy, using the surging energy waves to conceal himself, had already been fused with it. If he still could not escape the detection of a saint-level existence under these circumstances, then Luo Fan would have no other choice but to abandon this clone. The so-called doing one's best and leaving it up to the will of the heavens was nothing more than this. With a thought, an inexplicable connection was established between the clone and the original body. This time, it did not transmit too much information. It directly shared all of its senses through various complicated processes, allowing the main body to sense everything it could sense as if it was experiencing it personally. At this moment, the clone was contacting the original body on a day 3,000 years after the clone had entered the passage. It was also the longest distance between the clone and the original body. At this moment, Luo Fan's original body was still sitting at the entrance of the passage. Suddenly, he sensed that the clone was contacting him through this spiritual connection, and he knew that the clone had reached the exit of the passage. He could not help but withdraw most of his consciousness that had entered the Wuji palace to comprehend the inspiration of living beings and return to his original body. He locked onto the mysterious spiritual connection and worked hard to comprehend the various things that the clone had transmitted to him. The clone and the original body were the same self, had the same intelligence, and had the same mind. Hence, the original body naturally had no doubts about the clone's purpose. He did not need to say anything at all to understand that the clone was prepared for the worst. If the saint detected it, the clone would transmit the scene of the moment the saint made a move in case he ended up empty-handed. However, the possibility of such a saint making a move is not too high. Although he had prepared for the worst, Luo Fan's original body did not think that such a bad possibility would appear. The saint was omnipotent. If he really valued the untainted land and this passage, how could he have allowed the human venerable to enter the untainted land alone through this passage? Even if this passage was only for disbanded celestials of the great all-embracing heaven, what would happen if dozens, hundreds, or thousands of disbanded celestials of the great all-embracing heaven were sent? He could not do it. The saint did not have that many disbanded celestials of the great all-embracing heaven. Therefore, judging from the fact that the human venerable had entered the untainted land alone, the saint should not have attached much importance to this passage. Since he did not attach much importance to it, he naturally would not pay attention to this place all the time. It was possible that he had arranged for some existences at the great all-embracing heaven level to guard this passage. In this way, although entering the great Tianyuan world would still have to take a lot of risks, after all, it was not impossible to succeed. While the original body was thinking, Luo Fan's clone had already begun to slowly move toward the entrance of the passage. This passage was very mysterious, but after all, it required an infinite amount of energy to maintain, and it could even be said that it consumed an infinite amount of energy at every moment. Therefore, although the entrance looked dark, as if even light could not enter, in fact, there must be an infinite amount of energy pouring in from it, constantly replenishing the passage's consumption. Only in this way could the integrity of this passage be maintained. Under such circumstances, the power at the entrance of the passage surged, and naturally, there was an infinite amount of energy that was collided and agitated, changing the direction of its flow. Therefore, when the infinite amount of energy poured in, there was still a lot of it gushing out. In this way, it was not too abrupt for Luo Fan to leave this passage with the help of energy, and it was not impossible. Luo Fan's clone slowly moved toward the entrance of the passage. After a few hundred breaths, he had already come into contact with the wonderful barrier at the entrance of the passage. Although this passage needed to receive an infinite amount of energy from the great Tianyuan world to maintain its integrity. After all, the passage formed its own space and time, and it was fundamentally different from the great Tianyuan world outside the passage. Therefore, there was still some kind of barrier between the two. Although this barrier did not prevent energy from entering or leaving, it was still rather tough. When he came into contact with this barrier, Luo Fan felt an indescribable majesty penetrate his bones. This majesty was boundless and possessed unbelievable power. It was as if a sliver of it could completely wipe out Luo Fan's clone, his original body far away in the primordial world, and all existences related to him. Sensing the power of this barrier, Luo Fan could not help but feel nervous. From the looks of this barrier, if he triggered this barrier's counterattack, not only would his clone be killed, even his original body would be wiped out. This was different from what he had imagined. So how could he not feel nervous? However, the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring, and it had to be released. Now that he was already here, how could Luo Fan not give up without trying? Therefore, his clone clenched his teeth and crashed into the barrier like a stream of water. The barrier had no effect on the energy. In just an instant, Luo Fan's doppelganger felt as if it had passed through endless space and time. An incomparably vicissitude, vast and mysterious aura assaulted his face. In an instant, his entire body, from the core of his divine soul to the ends of his pores, had been thoroughly soaked. So this is the great Tianyuan world. As expected, this is the great Tianyuan world. Luo Fan could not help but let out an inexplicable sigh. No matter how detailed the human venerable's description was, no matter how much he learned about the situation of the great Tianyuan world from the human venerable, when he truly entered the great Tianyuan world, he realized just how feeble words were. He realized just how majestic, vast, and mysterious the real great Tianyuan world was. Therefore, he had such a complicated sigh. To be continued.